Chapter 240. After entering the rainy season, the first torrential rain in the north lasted for 3 days. Then the rain gradually weakened, turning into a gloomy drizzle. The black dragon lay in the open area of the palace, looking at the sea of flowers swaying in the wind and the hazy capital below, enjoying the tranquility. Further away, the mountains and forests were covered by mist, faintly discernible like a maze. During this time, Caesar had been thinking about how to make money. Blackwing's nest was still considered rich and self-sufficient, but the countries in the north were extremely poor. When the time came, if he wanted to integrate and build the Blackwing Empire, this would hold him back. Poverty and backwardness were twins. Without money, how could the Blackwing Empire develop? Caesar had thought that as a visitor from another world, it would be easy for him to come up with some ideas from his previous life to make money. But when he really put it into practice, he found that the actual situation was far from it. The rain was rolled up by the wind, hitting the glass one after another, rippling. Yes, he originally wanted to melt glass and sell it, but glass already existed in this world. Iradia was a world with wonderful magic as its core, and both advanced and backward coexisted. It cannot be judged by common sense. Many things here were even better than what Caesar had imagined. For example, there was no reinforced concrete in this world, but tall buildings could be built from the ground with the help of magic. There was no steam engine or internal combustion engine, but it relied on magic to drive huge war puppets. There were no bullet trains or passenger planes, but if the upper class needed it, teleportation spells could be used in a flash because of the existence of magic. This was a world with a crooked tree of technology, but it was equally glorious. Even in the distant empire where the sun never sets, such a great creation as the floating city existed. This was something that Caesar could not understand. If it was only this glorious achievement, in a sense, it was even more glorious than the world of Caesar's previous life. But on the other hand, the polarization in Eladia was extremely severe. It was to the point that the entire continent was split into 2 different worlds. Under the majestic shadow of the pinnacle of magic, the majority of ordinary people still lived a miserable life, just like in the Middle Ages. No matter if it was the Northlands or the Rising Sun City, both were still ruled by slavery. At the same time, even with such a glorious superstructure, the productivity level of the empire where the sun never sets was not high. In fact, this was a situation that the rulers had intentionally facilitated. Productivity and magical power were dangerous goods that required strict control. Once there was a huge increase, it would cause political unrest and greatly weaken the authority of the ruler. This was something that the princes, emperors, and other rulers would never allow. Therefore, it wasn't that Caesar couldn't come up with something that was better than the current era and could make money. It was just that most of the things that seemed better than the current era actually had substitutes in Iradia. Although they were niche, they still existed. If he didn't want to do useless work, he had to calm down and concentrate on studying the market. Then, he could attack accurately. He couldn't just come up with a new thing on the spur of the moment only to find that it wasn't popular and waste his energy. There was no progress on this matter at the moment. Caesar thought for a while and decided to change his mind. He crawled out of the Rhine imperial court and went to other parts of the capital. The former Rhine imperial court had now completely become a monster's paradise. It had become the settlement of the Blackwing clan. The humans who originally lived here had either actively or passively moved out of the capital. Only a few essential personnel were left, and they still lived under the watchful eyes of the Blackwing clan. After all, there was a huge difference between humans and monsters. After the Blackwing clan moved into the Rhine imperial court, if he still let these residents stay here, not only would these humans not be able to bear it, but Caesar himself would also feel uncomfortable. After all, when the Black Dragon Lord went out, it would cause a huge commotion. The feeling of being watched at all times was fine at first, but after a long time, it really became annoying. He came to a workshop that had just started work recently to create elegy cards. There were close to 500 people in this workshop. Only a small portion of them were human painters. Most of them were wild boar people from the Blackwing clan. The scene was strange. Caesar was still rather attentive to the first batch of finished products. He chose to let the strict and stubborn wild boar people create them. The cards did not look big, but creating them in reality was not an easy task. First, the thick paper that had been prepared had to be processed and polished to make it into a card paper of excellent quality and fine texture. Then, half of it had to be manually hollowed out to fill in the labels of the standard cards and expansion packs. After that, anti-counterfeiting carvings and images had to be printed. Finally, it was transferred to the painters to do the coloring and sealing. This was the process of creating the normal version of the elegy card. Due to the existence of the qualitative energy crystal and the Black Dragon Lord's request, the collector's version was even more complicated. It was only when the cards were about to be put into production that Caesar realized that his worries about piracy were unnecessary. At least during this period of time, when the elegy card had just been released, he did not have to worry about this at all. The reason was simple. Pirate merchants could not produce the same amount of cards as the Rhine Imperial Court. After all, the printing technology in this world was still far from being established. If he only used painters to complete the task of drawing each card, words were an important medium for storing information. In Iradia, they were not as important as one would imagine. Here, words were only a medium for the upper middle class to communicate and disseminate information. Only the upper middle class. Therefore, in Iradia, although books were important, they were extremely rare. This could be seen from the fact that Caesar wanted to learn knowledge, but had no way to do so. Most slaves and free people had very few chances to come into contact with books in their lives. In a situation where only the upper middle class and aristocrats used books, a few scribes who made a living out of it were enough to satisfy their needs. There was no urgent need. Even if the basic materials, such as paper and ink, were already available. Even if it had been developed for thousands of years, the important technology of printing still had not appeared. Although spellcasters could use spells to achieve the same effect of printing, in the end, the problem was back to square one. It could only satisfy the needs of the upper class. It could not be popularized in Iradia. On Caesar's side, he had already researched the technology of making molds when he was mass-producing armor in the Goblin Workshop. Therefore, engraving and printing was not a problem for Blackwing's nest. He only needed to give an idea, and Hod would know how to work and directly present the finished product. Wait a minute. Caesar was suddenly stunned. He looked at the human painters and the wild boar, people who were busy with their work. Mass production, template technology, that's right. Since he had already created an assembly line workshop, why did he not just expand it and form a real large-scale factory? Regardless of whether it was weapons and armor, clothes made from the fur produced in the north, or tools and daily necessities, they could all be produced in an assembly line factory and then exported to other countries. Before this, when an armor smith created a set of armor, he needed to be proficient in every step, such as material selection, drawing, casting, forging, and so on. It was the same for other similar professions, such as tailoring and carpentry. The way people thought had long become rigid. They were used to such a comprehensive process. Many things were even tailor-made. As long as the scale was large enough, it was obvious what kind of impact an assembly line factory would bring to these industries. When it first appeared, uncertain products such as tools and daily necessities might be rejected by other countries. However, large quantities of weapons, armor, and other military resources were things that any country would be eager to obtain. What Caesar wanted to do was to ban human trafficking in the north and pull them into the Blackwing factory to work as labor. He would then invest in the importation of metals and raw ores. At the same time, the weapons and armor produced in this way would be the lowest level of mass-produced products. They were neither legendary weapons nor enchanted with magic. They could only satisfy the most basic needs of low-level warfare. This was good because Caesar would not be hurt by the products he exported. Such weapons would not even pose a great threat to the Blackwing clan. That was it. He had already thought it through. Even if he could not create a new epic-making product, it did not matter. Just the insight and ideas he brought from the other world was an incomparably valuable asset to him. Under the situation where he had the ability to satisfy the initial investment, He could build assembly line factories in the north and export them under the name of Blackwing Manufacturing. In the following years, the north would become the world's factory, surpassing the central business city-states and becoming the second largest economy after the empire on which the sun never sets. Further up, when they were truly wealthy and had the ability to attract high-end talents and complete their technological reserves, Caesar could begin to research magical power to complete what he wanted. At least in his opinion, there were still many paths for magical technology to take. Chapter 241. Located in the northern kingdoms, the vast sea to the west of the green field was the place where Black Shia and Garin had hidden. This place was known as the Narrow Sea on the map. Although it was not as famous as the Sea of Stars or the Southern Sea, there were still countless floating islands. If one looked carefully, they would find traces of primitive activities here. Iradia's primitive people were not the unenlightened humans in the traditional sense. Instead, they were a completely independent humanoid species. Their standard body size was much larger than humans. Their eyes were small, their mouths were big, and their body hair was lush. Although their intelligence was lower than humans, it was not fatal. They also had their own unique language. The primitive people of the Narrow Sea lived among the scattered islands. They relied on fishing, gathering fruits, and raising meatworms in caves to maintain their lives. If the wind and sea conditions were good, they would immediately row their boats to the coastal areas and rob the coastal tribes. Just as Caesar was making a ruckus about the construction of the northern lands and the birth of capitalism for the feudal system, a small team of barbarians rowed across the sea and landed on the shore. This time, they did not loot everything they saw. Instead, they behaved themselves and went straight to the northern lands, requesting to meet with the supreme ruler of the land. At this time, the black dragon was no longer the lazy little dragon cub from before. Under normal circumstances, the Black Emperor was not someone you could meet whenever you wanted. However, this time was an exception. The visitors were from a foreign race. Caesar guessed that they might be people who came to talk about cooperation or people who came to seek refuge. Therefore, in the spacious hall of the Rhine Palace, the Black Dragon received the visitors. After seeing the primitive people, if it were not for the fact that they did not have wings, Caesar would have thought that the flying apes had come to visit again. What appeared in his eyes was a group of small giants who were all more than 2.5 meters tall. They were all muscular, covered in hair, and wrapped in uncut beast fur. Their heads were shrouded in black hair, and only their thick mouths could be seen. Even their eyes could not be seen. Logically speaking, the Rhine Palace did not allow outsiders to bring weapons in. However, look at the shabby things these fellows were holding. Each of them had a wooden mallet. After the battle lizard men reported to them, Caesar let them come in. However, before the two sides could speak, Luna was the first to lay on Black Dragon's neck and whispered to him, "Caesar, the wooden club in the leader's hand is a magical weapon. It's very powerful." Caesar straightened his body and stared at the person who had just arrived. How could such a despicable primitive have such a powerful magical weapon? Luna's perception would not be wrong. Outsiders, where did you come from, and why did you come? Caesar glanced at the primitive leader, who bowed to him and said, according to the inspection device, these guys were similar to the orcs and had good basic qualities. However, the leader in front of him was much stronger than the other primitive men. Although he still could not pose any threat to Caesar, he might be able to fight on par with Ryan and Kasia. "Arnold, my name is Arnold." When he said this, the guy put the wooden mallet behind his back. Caesar guessed that this was a kind of etiquette of the primitive men. "I am the leader of the primitive tribe, the king of the Narrow Sea, the loyal servant of the Black Blood God. I have traveled a long distance from the island across the sea to meet you, Dragon King Caesar, the most powerful man in the north." Iradia knew that it was very strange for the primitive men to speak the common language. Their vocabulary was short, and their words were vague. People could not help but laugh. However, Caesar did not laugh, nor did he respond. Instead, he turned his head and looked at Luna to ask for her opinion. The primitive man mentioned a god, which attracted Caesar's attention. However, in his knowledge, there was no god named Black Blood. Of course, this could be another name for a certain god. Luna shook her head at him. Obviously, she did not know which god he was referring to. You have already met him, Caesar said. After confirming that the other party was a follower of a certain god, the Black Dragon's attitude was not as friendly as before. Now, tell me why you are here. I am here to deliver a message on behalf of my master. Dragon King Caesar, you have gained the favor of my master, the primitive man said in a low voice. As long as you pay 10,000 people, you will be lucky enough to become a follower of His Majesty Mailer. If you are good enough, you can even become His Majesty Mailer's chosen. Arnold's face was serious, and he finished his words confidently. The temperature in the Rhine Palace immediately rose. The fierce, murderous aura crisscrossed in the field, and the firebird roared. The Black Dragon really stood up and looked down at this group of ugly and ridiculous primitive people. The people who paid 10,000, are you sleep-talking? Primitive men. So was Mailer. Caesar remembered that Mailer was a primitive god who was addicted to hunting and killing. His job rank was the god of hunting, and there was a description of Black Blood Beast in his alias. His original body was a bloody primitive beast, and his appearance was like a strong and agile big cat with dark blood-stained fur. An evil god with weak divine power. It was not known whether these words were Mailer's original words or the primitive man's miscommunication. Not to mention the Black Dragon. If these words were used to persuade anyone, it would only have the opposite effect. But thinking about it, a barbaric god and a group of self-righteous primitive men were a perfect match. Although Arnold did not know how to speak, it did not mean that he was stupid. So when he saw that the Black Dragon was about to get angry and was obviously dissatisfied, he quickly made a concession and put forward a request that he thought was the second best. They asked to build a temple of the god of hunting in the northern countries to develop believers. Of course, this required the consent and help of the Dragon King. After all, the primitive men did not have money. Caesar opened his mouth slightly, revealing his steel fangs that were as sharp as guillotines. Primitive man, if you still want to live, I advise you to disappear from my sight as soon as possible. Now, take your people and get the hell out of here. The Black Dragon had been in a good mood recently, but now it was completely messed up. He did not know whether these guys were arrogant or ignorant. God knew how much confidence and courage Mailer had given them, and it disgusted Caesar. Okay, Arnold took a deep breath. He made so many unreasonable requests, but this guy could still keep calm. Since you are not willing, my master will not force you. Let's make a deal. You help my master complete 3 things, and my master will fulfill 1 wish for you. What wish could a god with weak divine power fulfill? Roar. No one knew what the Dragon King said, but in the next moment, it let out a terrifying roar, and the Rin Palace instantly turned into a lightning purgatory. I'll send you back to your master now. After Mailer revives you, come and talk to me again. At the same time, a storm appeared. Chapter 242. By the time Arnold had dispersed the thunderous dragon breath in the Black Dragon's mouth, he was no longer a human being. The primitive leader's thick gray hair parted to both sides, revealing a pair of pale eyes that had disappeared from his pupils. God had descended. Heavy divine power emanated from the primitive man in front of him, resisting Caesar's dragon power and even suppressing it. This divine descent was not like Tiamat's powerless void projection. The god of hunting had a medium to descend to Iradia, and it could bear the divine power. Mailer, Caesar said in a low voice. Even if he only had weak divine power, no matter what, the other party was still a true god. Even though this wasn't the descent of an apostle, his true body had arrived, so he might not necessarily be able to defeat the Black Dragon Overlord. However, at the very least, Caesar already couldn't treat this group of primitive people in an unbridled manner like before. Mailer was the embodiment of savagery and hunting, and his holy emblem was a blood-stained brown beast claw. This guy's existence was very ancient, and he was one of the first true gods born in the endless world. He used terror and blood as capital to plunder faith. In fact, in the primitive era, Malur was quite a popular god, but as the various world and the astral world gradually became civilized, the black-blooded beasts became less and less popular. They were even hated because of their clergy and could only gather faith in some wilderness. In this case, after tens of thousands of years of adulthood, the god of hunting did not make any progress except for reaching the peak in the original era. Instead, his divine power continued to decline, and he eventually became one of the weakest gods among the true gods. Most of the chaotic and evil gods were typical examples of arrogance, so when this god descended, he immediately took 2 steps forward. Although he was in human form, his gestures were still beast-like. "Pledge allegiance to me, dragon with a different body," the god of hunting said quite straightforwardly. It seemed that it was not the primitive man Arnold's way of conveying the message, but his master was really so confident. "I will grant thee the black-blooded holy emblem to bless this land." It wasn't that the god of hunting didn't have any dragon followers. When Tiamat refused to admit that the dragon beasts that had lost their minds were dragons, those 5-color dragon beasts became her targets. The dragon beasts were also happy to seek refuge with the similarly barbaric and primitive black-blooded beasts and become her followers. Based on the current situation, Malur's attitude towards Caesar was the same as usual. Malur treated him like a degenerate and demented draconic beast. Of course, the god of hunting did not know that Tiamat had already looked for Caesar before this. Otherwise, he would not have appeared here. For this reason, Malur was rather pleased with himself, thinking that he was the first to discover a dragon-like anomaly with great potential. Gods were rather sensitive to faith, and he could tell at a glance that this black dragon had no faith. He even thought that this fellow was a draconic beast that had been abandoned by the evil dragon mother and had nowhere else to rely on. Malur believed that the appearance of the god of black blood would make it so grateful that it would join him and become his follower's minion. "Sorry, god of hunting, I'm already a follower of Her Majesty Tiamat." After all, it was only a weak divine power, so although Caesar was a little serious, he still treated it differently. He was not as careful as when facing Tiamat. He shook his head and said, "In my territory, you can't get the faith you want." His words were blunt, and there was no room for negotiation. Caesar was merciless and drew a clear line, even at the expense of offending the black-blooded beast. Based on his understanding of the gods, it was not fatal to be hostile to a god, but he could never get involved with these guys. Take Malur as an example. Even if the black-blooded beasts had the Lord of Storm as their leader, given the nature of the gods of chaos, the Lord of Storm would not care about Malur's enemies as long as they did not touch Talos. Even if Malur was killed, the Lord of Storm would not care. But if he reached a deal or an alliance with these guys, the nature of the relationship would immediately change. The situation between gods was more complicated than the political struggles of humans. That would involve Caesar in the vortex of a group of forces. Not only Malur, but even Talos and the entire group of chaos would take the Black Dragon into consideration. They would count him as part of their own group of forces and order him around at any time. As a god who had lived for countless years, there weren't many idiots. It would be very difficult for Caesar to take advantage of the situation like a fish in water. He would need to invest a lot of time and energy. He already had a relationship with Tiamat, so he didn't want to get involved in any more trouble. "Damn, scum, are you trying to fool me? How dare you refuse this gift?" However, Caesar's words made the god of hunting roar. The anger of the gods of chaos came so easily. He began to stride towards the black dragon and roared, "Lowly reptile, incompetent beast, I will never forgive you. I will twist your head off and use it as a sacrifice. I will pull out all your scales and turn them into maggots. I will use your dirty organs to reward my slaves." The terrible voice rumbled in the Rhine Palace. The Blackwing clan was instantly agitated and quickly surrounded this position, ready to fight. Malur's insults and threats continued, but Caesar had decided to ignore him. Royalty, dozens and hundreds of times the gravity, came in an instant. The primitive people did not even have time to make a sound. They immediately knelt down and lay prone on the ground, showing a ridiculous posture like maggots. Even Mailer was staggered by the sudden gravity. He bent down, but after all, this guy had used his believers to descend here. He was not that weak, so he quickly turned around and straightened his back. Of course, this was far from the end. The power of royalty was that the more the subject resisted, the fiercer the pressure would be. Unless one could surpass a certain threshold, it would be difficult to break free. Therefore, an even more powerful pressure immediately counterattacked. Although Mailer was chaotic, his brain was not chaotic. After all, he had lived for so many years and had rich experience in being attacked. Therefore, he quickly noticed this point and began to increase his strength. After a short confrontation, the god of black blood finally used his strength to tear apart the invisible layer of pressure that wrapped around him. Then, he opened his mouth, wanting to show his majesty and ridicule Black Dragon. However, before he could speak, royalty, after a while, Mailer opened his mouth again. Royalty, the Black Dragon had already embarked on the right path. His psionic power had begun to enter the entry level, and his spiritual power was steadily increasing. Therefore, the current Caesar's limit was 4 times. He could still maintain a good state when he could continuously release 3 rounds of command. Therefore, poor Mailer had to go through 3 rounds of royalty before he could relax for a moment. At this time, he had already increased his strength to the limit. His unreduced power caused the entire palace to shake. Unfortunately, this guy's actual combat ability had increased. After all, this kind of descent without any ceremony or blood sacrifice was far from enough to unleash 1/10 of his full strength. Enough! The god of black blood was furious. He was completely furious and almost went crazy. He shouted at the black dragon hysterically. Enough! Who do you think you are? Lizard, I am a true god of the endless worlds. You can only do this at a time like this. Before he could finish speaking, he was grabbed by the huge black dragon that had pounced on him. Chapter 243. Mailer was right. To the real Mailer, such a black dragon could only be regarded as a reptile. If they were in the god's kingdom or the astral world, it would be easy for a true god, even if he only had the power of a lesser god, to crush a legendary dragon. Unfortunately, this was Iradia, and Mailer was only here in a borrowed body. Therefore, the situation was completely reversed. After Caesar grabbed Mailer's body, he directly slammed him to the ground. The silly god shouted and jumped up, roaring, but he was once again flicked away by Caesar's hooked toe. The second time, the third time, and the fourth time. The difference in size between the two was huge. Even though this primitive man was nearly 3 meters tall, he was still trampled on like a toy in front of the Black Dragon Lord. He was pressed to the ground and rubbed like a dead pig. What a weak god. Caesar thought that although this guy's vitality was strong, this guy was not a threat to him at all. Even though the primitive man's power had also surpassed the legendary realm, his human body was not coordinated, and he had used too much divine power to tear apart the royal power. Therefore, Mailer did not show the fighting ability that a legendary realm should have. However, the reason why gods were called gods was that they could do things that ordinary creatures could not. Caesar's continuous whipping was another way for the god of hunting to humiliate him. So he became even crazier. In an uncontrollable roar, the god of hunting, Mailer, began to explode for the second time. The primitive man let out a roar and jumped up from the ground. He used all of the remaining divine power in this body to create a huge barrier. At the same time, he temporarily left Arnold's body, allowing the primitive leader to regain his consciousness and autonomous control. However, only half a second later, the primitive leader did something unexpected. He gouged out his own heart. At the same time, the other primitive men, who had been frightened by the confrontation between the god and the giant dragon, also did the same thing. The fanatics performed a blood sacrifice. Mailer was going to come again in a more powerful way. As the blood spurted out, a terrifying force surged in from an unknown place, carrying on the ritual of the blood sacrifice. Under normal circumstances, a blood sacrifice would not be so simple to complete, but Mailer had taken the initiative to resonate with it, and even paid a certain price for it. He had to descend now. Caesar's cracked vertical eye moved. It seemed that the gods of chaos were quite crazy when they went crazy, which was in line with his expectations. Yes, until now, the development of the situation was the result of Caesar's intentional promotion. He had the ability to kill Arnold directly, but he had not done so before. As a true god of chaos and evil, Mailer was simply a standard research tool. It was difficult to find a more suitable research tool among the gods. Caesar was constantly provoking Mailer, trying to understand the situation of the mysterious gods through his reactions. After all, from a scientific point of view, the gods were actually a more powerful life form. Although they were from different factions and had different strengths, their general abilities and techniques should be the same. Through studying Mailer, he could understand the characteristics of the gods and make preparations for the future. Arnold's heart had been gouged out, but the primitive man did not die immediately. The bloody hole in his heart was filled by a mass of gas, black and rolling in it. The primitive man bent down, his muscles expanding, his hair growing, and his teeth protruding out of his mouth, turning into long and sharp fangs. His fingers and toes pierced through his skin, pale and exposed like sharp claws. Divine power surged again, and Arnold, who had fallen to the level of mortal, was once again forcefully pulled up to the level of a legend. The surge of power did not slow down and continued to climb. Mailer was about to descend again. Caesar tilted his head. It seemed that the research was forced to stop. Mailer's power, after the blood sacrifice, was very strong. It was difficult for him to play with him. The situation was on the verge of going out of control. Then, the black dragon reacted. He took a deep breath, and fine red lines spread out from his chest. Then, he directly threw out a dustless land to destroy the divine power barrier. Almost at the same time, when the barrier was destroyed, Caesar passed through the location of the barrier and instantly arrived at Arnold's side. He grabbed this strange life that was half human and half beast that was ready to attack. Then, he unleashed a mouthful of dragon's breath and burned the enemy into a charred corpse. Then, he immediately turned his head 360 degrees and killed all the other primitive people who were still struggling. Wherever the flames passed, they were burned into ashes. The Black Dragon Lord's movements were smooth, and the whole process took no more than 9 seconds. It was so fast that it subverted people's understanding. This was not a legend Black Dragon, but a legend Caesar. Mailer's roar was soon heard. This was the umpteenth time he had roared in this matter. Even if the god of hunting only came with a blood sacrifice, he could suppress the Black Dragon Lord and even kill it, let alone come with his true body. But unfortunately, it was over. The blood sacrifice was interrupted. The damned Black Dragon had destroyed everything at the crucial moment. Everything was coming to an end. His believers had all died, and there was no life form nearby that could bear his divine power. But at this time, this chaotic and angry evil god calmed down. The previous high-pitched roar suddenly disappeared. If not for the fact that his divine power had not completely faded, Caesar would have thought that he had rolled out of Iradia. The real reason was that at this time, Mailer had set Caesar Tangerine as his prey. Mailer's priesthood was the god of the hunt, and he was best at hunting. Only when he was hunting would he remain calm and enter an extreme state of calmness. This was also the most dangerous time for Mailer, the black blood beast. This was a point that everyone knew. Black Dragon, under the void, the divine power that Mailer could not bear was gradually fading. The god of the hunt said calmly, "Caesar Tangerine, you have become my prey. Wait patiently. I will come to you personally." The Black Dragon, who had returned to his throne, heard this and turned his head again, staring at the black divine power visible to the naked eye at the top. "I'll wait." He raised his head and responded. He had been stubborn for so long, and he did not back down at the last moment. "I hope so." Leaving such a sentence, the trace of the god of the hunt disappeared completely. The Black Dragon Lord maintained a fearless posture and waited for a long time. After confirming that there was no problem, this guy's face finally collapsed. Maelor's reputation was not great, but it was not small either. Caesar had learned about the deeds of this beast from books and knew that he had become the hunting target of the god of the hunt. Of course, this was not the most important thing. The key was that Maelor said that he would come to him personally. This meant that the god of the hunt had planned to leave his divine kingdom, cross the astral world, and come to Iradia personally. He would not stop until he killed the black dragon, who had humiliated and provoked a true god. As a chaotic and evil god, in order to vent his anger, Maelor was willing to do such a thankless thing. It was a little troublesome. No matter how strong the Black Dragon Lord was now, he would not be a match for a true god. But it was not particularly bad, and it was not a big problem. After all, a cheap ancestor was still an ancestor. Chapter 244. At night, Caesar was sitting in the sea of flowers outside the palace, looking in the direction of the king's city below. He was in a daze. Luna, who couldn't sleep either, was beside him. She hugged her knees and sat quietly in the shadow of the Black Dragon Lord's jaw. She looked up at the big black dragon, who was in a daze. After a while, she said in a complicated tone, "Caesar, didn't you go a little too far today?" In the eyes of the forest fairies, no matter which side of the true god, they all needed to be respected and incomparably powerful. However, the black dragon had done a rebellious thing. He had directly pressed down on the incarnation of the god of hunting and beat it up violently. They had become mortal enemies. Indeed, a little. In front of Luna, Caesar wouldn't put on a brave front, so he simply admitted it frankly. But then he continued to say, "But there's no other way. Now the countries in the north need to suppress the theocracy. I only intend to leave some neutral gods whose doctrines are peace and tolerance. The god of hunting is not only an evil god, but also an evil god of chaos. Making a deal with him and building a temple for him is simply asking for trouble and asking for trouble. But that's a god." Luna reminded him a little timidly. Even though she had been around Caesar for a long time and had been influenced a lot, she was still Iradia's life after all. The deep-rooted ideas couldn't be erased. In Luna's view, the majesty of a god was supreme and couldn't be disrespected or disobeyed. Of course, this wasn't the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem was that the little fellow didn't have a direct understanding of the gods. In her impression, every god was infinitely powerful. Although Caesar was also very powerful, he couldn't be compared with a god. She was worried that the big black dragon would be hurt. Well, if only she wasn't a forest fairy. At least she could help the big black dragon share some of the burden. Luna thought with disappointment. Don't worry. However, the victim herself was very calm. Caesar came over to comfort her. There are different levels between gods. If the black-blooded beast used blood sacrifice and apostles to descend, he wouldn't be able to do anything. I have an army, but he only has a few believers. What I need to worry about is him coming to Iradia in person. But if he is really, as he said, preparing to leave the divine kingdom and cross the astral world, Caesar did not continue his words because an outsider had arrived and interrupted his conversation with Luna. The little female black dragon entered the sea of flowers and stopped in front of the black dragon. The two little black dragons still hadn't obtained authority. However, they were treated much better than before. Because of Tiamat's divine blessing, their growth speed was much faster than before. Although Blakesia was still like a little cub in front of Caesar, this fellow was already close to the young black dragon's size, more than 10 meters tall. Blakesia and Garen's current mission was to monitor the borders and prevent anyone from escaping under the strict control of the northern kingdoms. With the assistance of a large group of Black Shirt Army's minions, the two little dragons did a pretty good job. However, at this time, the little female dragon was summoned back by the Black Emperor. "Caesar," she said, paying her respects to the Black Dragon Lord. Ever since he was blessed by Tiamat, Garen's situation was not bad. However, Blakesia had undergone a huge change. Her desire for power and wealth had been suppressed to an extremely low level. At the same time, her personality was no longer as manic and impulsive as before. This was beneficial to Caesar's control. However, to be honest, he did not think that this was a good thing. Instead, he felt that it was a pity. The two little dragons had lost their natural instincts and were castrated in a different way. It was pitiful and sad. However, Caesar did not have the ability to stop it. This was Tiamat's order, and he could not refuse it. Moreover, as normal dragons, the two of them were loyal followers of the five-headed dragon queen. He could only try his best to protect himself. Caesar did not pay attention to Blakesia, who had rushed over. Instead, he lowered his head and said to Luna gently, "It's time to sleep. If you're tired, go back to the palace's treasury and wait for me." The treasury that was originally located in the green field had now been moved to the Rhine Palace. However, Luna's little house was still kept there. At the same time, it was also Caesar's resting place. Luna was stunned for a moment before she reacted. Seeing Caesar's serious expression, she did not ask further. Instead, she replied with a and flapped her little wings to enter the palace. She obediently went back to the treasury to wait for him. It was not that Caesar wanted to hide it from Luna. It was because he wanted to talk to Blakesia about Tiamat. For the current Caesar, Tiamat was really an existence that he could only look up to for the time being. His fear of the evil dragon mother was 100 times more than Mailer's. To say something disheartening, if Tiamat had her eyes on the little girl and wanted to do something to Luna, Caesar would have a hard time stopping her. Therefore, ever since he was noticed by Tiamat, Caesar tried his best to avoid mentioning the evil dragon mother in front of Luna. He did not even tell Luna about his deal with Tiamat. This did not exist before. Caesar knew very well that it was best not to let Tiamat know about his relationship with Luna. On the other hand, the less the little girl knew, the safer she would be. It was quite sullen, but at least before he had the power of a demigod, Caesar had no choice but to hide it like this. Looking at the little girl's back until Luna's figure disappeared from the back of the black gold throne, Caesar turned his head and said directly, "I want to see the evil dragon mother." Blakesia was stunned. Although her personality had been retrained by Tiamat, after hearing this, the little female dragon could not help but curse in her heart. What? Even if she was a loyal follower of Her Majesty Tiamat, she had never seen Her Majesty's true appearance after receiving the divine favor. Now, this big brother of hers wanted to see the evil dragon mother. What? Did having a big head and a fierce appearance get preferential treatment? Of course, she did not dare to say this directly to the Black Dragon Lord. So Blakesia chose to use a more tactful method and explained softly, "Caesar, the Dragon Queen, is the common ancestor of all the pentashade dragons in the endless worlds. She has her eyes on the entire astral plane and has many things to do. However, you're not a follower of the Dragon Queen, so it is difficult for you to gain the favor of the Great Mother." "I don't care. I want to see the evil Dragon Mother." Caesar shook his head and said, "Pray for me." Long before they were born, he already knew that these two fellows were Tiamat's loyal followers. During that period of unstable time in the lake, these two little dragons had been praying day and night, praying for protection. Even after they had sought refuge with him, these two little dragons had built a small shrine, hoping to gain the favor of their great mother. Caesar had never cared about this matter, but now that the two little dragons had truly received the blessing of the gods, their prayers were more attention-grabbing than the other chromatic dragons, and it was easier for them to attract the attention of the evil dragon mother. That was why Caesar called Blakesia over so that she could be his mouthpiece to communicate with the Dragon Queen. Now that I think about it, Tiamat might have had such intentions when she gave the two unremarkable young dragons the power of faith. However, I think that the Dragon Queen must have a deeper plan, which would make it easier for her to descend next to Caesar. Blakesia had a headache. This was the first time she saw Caesar so confident. However, if the Black Dragon Lord insisted on making trouble, she had no choice but to close her eyes and try to pray. Her Majesty Tiamat above. Chapter 245. Amidst Blakesia's nonchalant muttering, the elemental activity in the surroundings gradually became lively. The little female dragon was pleasantly surprised. This was a sign that Tiamat was listening to her call. She found it hard to imagine that a casual prayer could actually miraculously communicate with her great ancestor. Blakesia immediately became dignified and serious, earnestly and sincerely beginning to pray. The next moment, a powerful divine power broke through Iradia's dimensional barrier and invaded the young female dragon's brain. Blakesia's body trembled slightly, and then her expression changed from reverence and piety to pride and dignity. After the god of the hunt, Malor, the 5 dragon queens also used a borrowed body to descend. With Blakesia as the base, the chaotic 5-color divine power formed a huge layer of projection on her body. An earth-shattering dragon aura and divine aura burst forth from the little female dragon, causing Caesar to instantly feel that he was rapidly becoming insignificant. Tiamat's divine power was only 1 level higher than Malor's, a mid-tier divine power. However, her body was a dragon, and her true strength was more than 100 times stronger than Malor's. Even a high-tier true god would have to avoid Tiamat in a direct confrontation. Ancestor. Caesar's scalp went numb. Tiamat was already so terrifying just by using a borrowed body. One had to know that this body belonged to Blakesia, a young female dragon. If it was a legendary ancient dragon that could bear even more divine power, Tiamat's strength would be unimaginable. Fortunately, legendary ancient dragons were not cabbages that could be found everywhere. There were not many Tiamat in the various prime material planes. However, it was undeniable that this was a true big shot. Even if she left her divine kingdom, she would be able to traverse endless realms. If she was in her divine kingdom, she would be practically invincible. Oh, it's only been a few days. Looks like you've grown up quite a bit. You're really a healthy and clever child. Tiamat looked at Caesar and clicked her tongue in amazement. Why, my child? Seems like you've changed your mind. You want to enter your mother's embrace? I welcome you anytime. I think so, ancestor. However, I don't seem to be able to do it now. Caesar said. Under the heavy pressure, he felt that the air was becoming stagnant and his movements were hindered. And this time, I have something more important to report to you. You can do it now. I believe in you. Tiamat's voice was unexpectedly affectionate and gentle. She suddenly took 2 steps forward and stuck close to Black Dragon. This time, the evil dragon matriarch had a physical body instead of a void projection like before, so she borrowed Bulksai's body and abruptly placed her claws on Caesar's body. This caused Black Dragon to become vigilant. He subconsciously stepped back and continued to emphasize, Your Majesty Tiamat, I really have something important to tell you. I know, but don't say anything first. The evil dragon mother approached once again, and the 5-color divine power also arrived at the same time. It wrapped around Caesar's body, making him unable to move. Its claws once again caressed the Black Dragon's body, gently stroking his chin. Caesar was considering whether or not he should use the spotless land to break free. He still had not figured out what the Dragon Queen was going to do. The development of the situation was beyond his expectations. To be honest, the two of you really look alike. Tiamat said something that made Caesar confused. I really like you more and more. Have you really not considered entering my embrace? You must know that you will become my most beloved child, and with my help, you will quickly grow into the king of black wings who will cover the sky. Millions of true dragons will bow their heads before you. I can do it myself. Caesar really wanted to say this and reject the evil dragon mother, but he could not say anything because Tiamat had already caressed the scales on his neck and continued to explore downwards. A feedback like an electric shock came from the scales. Caesar had the illusion that his soul was separated from his body. This feeling made his whole body tremble. The caress of the 5-headed dragon queen was not something that was easy to bear. Tiamat's divine power was pouring into his body. In the end, the evil dragon mother did not give up on controlling the Black Dragon Lord. She was trying to intensify Caesar's bloodline and awaken his dragon instincts, greed, cruelty, laziness. The original desires of these 5-colored dragons would welcome a breakthrough growth with the awakening of Caesar's bloodline and dominate the poor 5-colored dragon's brain. This would allow Tiamat to find an opportunity to take advantage of it and completely control this black dragon. However, Tiamat strangely found that the black dragon's innate elemental bloodline was like a pool of stagnant water. No matter how her divine powers stimulated it, or even created a divine seed to plant, Caesar's bloodline was still motionless. Therefore, just as the black dragon was about to use the spotless land to break free, the Dragon Queen had already pulled back her divine power and returned Caesar his freedom. Even if it is a degenerated five-color dragon beast that has lost its intelligence, as long as I am willing, I can still reactivate the true dragon blood in its body. Tiamat let go of Caesar and took a step back. Her expression was no longer pleasant, and her voice became dignified. She asked without reason, "Are you related to the monster Mad Clamor?" Frostwing, Mad Clamor, the pure white dragon of the apocalypse. It was a mentally deranged and extremely addicted to magic. In order to become stronger, it was willing to do anything. It was also famous in the Endless Realms and was one of the two most famous and powerful freaks among the mutated dragons. No, Caesar flatly denied. This was the truth. He wanted to meet those mutated creatures from different worlds and see which world they came from. Unfortunately, he did not have the chance to do so now. He himself did not know why his bloodline had become like this. It was something that he was born with. If there was a need to investigate the reason, it would probably have to be traced back to before he was born, to the history of Nessatoria's dragon egg. It seems that there is indeed no such thing. Before Caesar could answer, Tiamat had already cast a lie detection divine spell. After confirming that the black dragon was not lying to her, her expression eased a lot. After all, the evil dragon mother had learned from her mistakes. After so many mutated dragons had rebelled, she had already strictly controlled this aspect. She would not allow any more mutated dragons to exist that were not under her control. Caesar knew what Tiamat had done to him, but fortunately, the useless bloodline that he had always complained about had now become his best protection. Without the true dragon blood, as long as he refused to believe in the evil dragon mother, he would be completely free from Tiamat's corruption. Speak. What is important to you? After confirming that she was unable to control Caesar, Tiamat's attitude towards him took a nosedive. She was no longer as friendly as before. I hope that what you say will really interest me. You have to know that I don't have time to play games with you. You will be interested, Caesar said with certainty. Then, he directly threw out the main point of the topic. The god of the hunt wants to descend upon Iradia. Marat. Tiamat's voice was slightly higher. She did not have to be afraid of directly calling the god's name. The five-color divine power turned into a phantom of 5 heads, looking down at the black dragon. That worm that has been hiding and trembling in the god's kingdom? He dares to leave the god's kingdom? Are you fooling me? No, this is the truth, Caesar said. Then, he told Tiamat everything that had happened before. As soon as Black Dragon's narration ended, Tiamat laughed loudly. Her vigorous laughter shook the entire Rhine kingdom. "Haha, well done, my child. You are really becoming more and more to my liking. The god of the hunt threatened me before he left, saying that I had become his prey. He will personally descend upon Iradia." Caesar added, "If it is this guy, he might really be able to do such a thing. However, is still a problem whether Marat can even leave his own god's kingdom." Tiamat laughed loudly. Then, she suddenly stopped and nodded. "But I know. I will leave a seed on Iradia's boundary wall to investigate everything around the boundary wall. If Marat really dares to appear in Iradia's boundary wall, I will kill him." After leaving behind a domineering statement, Tiamat did not say goodbye to Caesar. She suddenly withdrew the divine power that had descended upon Blakesia and left. Chapter 246. Only when Tiamat's divine power and divinity completely disappeared did Blakesia regain her freedom. The little female dragon who regained control was stunned for a moment. She was stunned for a second before she roared in excitement. "The Great Mother has borrowed my body." Blakesia was overjoyed. To the Pinochet dragons who believed in the evil dragon mother, this was a great honor. However, she was only excited for a short while before she immediately shifted her attention to a more exciting topic. Caesar, Her Majesty Tiamat actually treats you differently. The little female dragon clung onto him again. She was the recipient of the evil dragon mother's descent. Although Tiamat had taken control of her body, Bolkathia's soul and thoughts did not stagnate, nor was she blinded. Therefore, she was like an invisible third party, watching the entire conversation between Caesar and Tiamat. Seeing that her brother was valued so highly by Tiamat, she immediately felt a sense of pride as if she was related to him by blood. Excitement and excitement were unavoidable, and she could not wait to hear Caesar tell her the whole story of what had happened. However, she was ignored by Caesar. The Black Dragon Lord pushed her away with a sullen face and only said, "Go back and share with Garen." Then, he turned around and crawled back to his palace without saying anything. It was a little too cold. Bolkathia was stunned for a moment. Although Caesar was not particularly friendly to her usually, it was not to the point where he kept her at arm's length. She did not know the reason. When the battle lizardmen guards diligently closed the palace door with a bang, Caesar's face instantly became gloomy. It was like the calm before the storm, the dark clouds before the rain. Tiamat did not mention any conditions. This was the crux of the problem. The evil dragon mother's focus was not on the mother of dragons, but on the evil dragon. With Tiamat's previous calculative nature, even when she said that she would let Caesar go, she still wanted him to remember it. Would she agree so easily, helping him to kill another true god for free? This was possible, but the probability was very low. The most likely reason was that Tiamat was not unable to benefit from it. If she intercepted the god of the hunt outside Iradia's boundary wall and successfully killed Malor, the evil dragon mother would be able to devour the divine power of the black blood beast and merge with her divine title. Even if Malor was only a lesser god, it was enough to greatly increase Tiamat's power. However, was it really that easy? It had been at least several million years since the birth of the gods. If gods were so easy to kill, and at the same time, it was profitable to merge divine power and priesthood, after millions of years of mutual devouring, it was impossible for there to be so many gods in the astral world. Based on this situation, there would only be a dozen or even a few great divine powers left in the astral plane. Moreover, they were the most powerful master gods who held countless priesthoods. Therefore, even if it was a low-level divine power, even if it left the god kingdom and lived in the astral world, it was not that easy to kill it. Looking at the historical records, almost no gods had died in the astral world. 90% of the gods' deaths occurred in the main material world. Scholars collectively referred to the endless boundaries as the astral world. The astral world was a big circle that accommodated all things, and in its wide area, it included independent small circles such as the God Kingdom, the main material world, the semi-material plane, and so on. The boundary wall was the arcs of these small circles. It was not impossible for powerful true gods, evil creatures, demons, and devils to cross the astral world. However, if they wanted to cross the astral world, they had to pass through these boundary walls. Caesar thought that the boundary wall was a very powerful thing. It was possible for gods to descend to the lower realm and cross the boundary wall in person. However, in the process of crossing the boundary wall, true gods would suffer huge losses. The more powerful a god was, the greater the resistance they would encounter and the greater the consumption. Of course, this was only a small problem and not the key. The more important problem was that the boundary wall was like a high-voltage line that enforced control. Faith could only be transported from the inside to the outside and could not be transmitted from the outside to the inside. This meant that gods who descended to the main material world could only absorb the faith of this main material world and could not obtain the faith of other worlds. This was a fatal blow to true gods who relied on faith as the source of their power. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, true gods would almost never descend to the main material world. Even if they did, they would not stay for long because there were other dangers. They had to guard against the covetous eyes of primal demigods and false gods, as well as the sneak attacks of powerful evil creatures that fed on divine power. Those creatures were quite sensitive to true gods. The longer they stayed in the main material world, the weaker they would become. All true gods were bound to be affected by this rule, and this could not be changed or avoided. Of course, there was an exception, the god of gods, Aoo, the creator of the world. However, Aoo's will would not interfere at all. Even if the astral world exploded and the world restarted, he would not interfere. Speaking of which, if the god of the hunt, Malur, met Tiamat in the astral world, the mother of evil dragons would find it difficult to truly kill him. The most likely scenario was that Malur would be beaten to the point of fleeing, and after paying a certain price, he would return to his god kingdom and hide again. This would mean failure for Tiamat, and it would be equivalent to her wasting her efforts. The mother of evil dragons, who had lived for countless years, would not have thought of this possibility. Then, did she have a more reliable plan? One that would definitely devour and kill Malur? Yes. Malur's goal was to enter Iradia to hunt down the black dragon. He would have to cross the world wall, and that would cause the god of the hunt's power to be greatly depleted. Therefore, after descending, Malur could not immediately take action and needed a period of time to recuperate. From this point onwards, Malur would no longer have a source of faith, and the upper limit of his divine power would begin to fall. Malur was, of course, very aware of this problem. So after recovering his power, he could not wait to start hunting down the black dragon. At this time, a true god was not something a legendary dragon could stop. Therefore, the black dragon would be killed. After Malur finished torturing and venting his anger, he would definitely not stay in Iradia. He would return to the astral world and return to his god kingdom as quickly as possible. However, to leave, he would have to cross the world wall again. Then, he would bump into Tiamat, who was waiting outside the world wall. At this time, Malur's power was at its weakest. If they met under normal circumstances, Tiamat would have a 100% chance of defeating Malur, but the probability of killing him was only 10%. However, at this time, Tiamat had at least a 70% chance of devouring Malur and taking over his divine domain. Caesar thought for a moment. Tiamat would definitely make such a choice. After all, an uncontrollable abnormality was far less valuable and attractive than the divine domain of a true god. The key was that Tiamat did not make him pay any price or make any promises. Caesar subconsciously felt that something was wrong. Following his train of thought, he could basically guess the mother of evil dragon's plan. Sigh. Black Dragon sighed. It seemed that thinking too much was not good. If he was more simple and did not think about these things, he could still feel Tiamat's motherly care and protection. It was a pity that the happiness of being protected by his boss had disappeared in an instant. However, Caesar did not feel sorry for himself. In the end, there was nothing to be angry about. As the mother of evil dragons, Tiamat's decision could not be more normal. After all, an evil god was an evil god. Now that Tiamat was unreliable, he had to make a backup plan. Chapter 247. What Caesar wanted to do was not difficult. On the contrary, it sounded very simple, and that was to spread the news that the god of the hunt was about to descend upon Iradia. If this was accomplished, the effect of this matter would be even more guaranteed than Tiamat's promise. Once a weak, true god crossed the barrier and descended, he would become a delicious piece of cake in the eyes of many intelligent creatures. After Malur descended, he would not even be able to fend for himself, let alone take the time and energy to find trouble with the Black Dragon Lord. It would be good if he did not immediately escape. As long as this news could spread throughout the continent and had a certain degree of credibility, the ancient evildoers who had been waiting for 1,000 years would awaken from their slumber. The demigods and liches who were eyeing the god of might would also swarm over, eager to hunt down this black-blooded beast who held the title of god of the hunt. Malur might be a true god, but for a god of the lowest level to descend upon the prime material plane, unless it was in a desolate prime material plane, with low martial power. This was the only way he could be treated. However, this matter sounded simpler than asking for help from Tiamat, but in reality, it was much more difficult to carry out. How to spread the news from the desolate north to the entire continent of Iradia. Even if Caesar roared until he broke his throat, it would still be useless. This was the problem that the Black Dragon had to face. Propaganda. Caesar muttered softly. He was a transmigrator, so he knew that in his previous life on Earth, the way of war had long since broken away from pure cold weapons. In that era, everything was used. Propaganda, persuasion, trade suppression, and so on were all important parts of war. Of course, Caesar was not thinking so far ahead. He only needed to solve the problem of Maelor's descent. However, he could take advantage of this opportunity to set up a propaganda department before the establishment of the Blackwing Empire. This could also prepare for the establishment of the Black Dragon and the establishment of the Empire in the future. A good propaganda department under the control of Blackwing's Nest could have a subtle influence on more people, making a great contribution to maintaining the stability of Blackwing's territory and the coexistence of many races. But who should be in charge of this? Caesar pondered. Right now, the core authority area of Blackwing's Nest consisted of a few clan leaders, wild beasts, and mutated monsters. All of them belonged to the evil faction. It seemed that no one was up to the task. Life's opportunities were always unpredictable. Varlet Cadam was a bard who had once been in dire straits. The reason why he used the word once was because he had now changed his appearance. He had gotten close to the big tree, known as Blackwing's Nest, and had become an internal member of the Rhine royal court. Recently, Barrett had been living quite comfortably. Perhaps in the other countries in the north, the people still held an indifferent and hostile attitude towards the Blackwing's Nest. However, in the Lion Kingdom, the place where the Dragon King lived, under the high-pressure control of the draconic aura, the only thing left for the living was reverence. Thanks to the fact that he had personally met the Black Emperor, Barrett's current position in the Black Shirts was quite high. To this day, all the humans who served Blackwing's Nest were collectively referred to as Black Shirts. Barrett's current days were to complete 3 hours of imitation work every day. After that, he would keep an eye on the other members of the team and occasionally strike up a conversation with the singers he liked. The Black Dragon Lord was not stingy or harsh to those who sought refuge with him. Thus, Barrett was no longer embarrassed. He was a completely different person from before. Then, he was once again summoned by the Black Emperor. Before Caesar met Barrett, he had already summoned Ren and Hogg to discuss this matter. Thus, when he met this bard, he did not spend any extra time slowly probing him. This was because he did not care whether this fawning human would leak the news or not. He was also not worried that the news would leak. Barrett, right? Looks like you've been living quite well recently. Caesar went straight to the point and asked directly, do you think a piece of news can spread across the entire continent in a short period of time? Barrett's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the Black Emperor had always been different from the human kings, Grand Dukes, and other rulers. He was never tactful and went straight to the point. He was a smart man and immediately knew that this question should be the key to why the Black Dragon had summoned him. The bard, who had been traveling all year round, had brought him a wealth of experience, allowing him to deal with this consideration. Barrett thought for a while and said in a low voice, a piece of news, if it is not very shocking and at the same time has an unquestionable authenticity, it is actually very difficult to spread across the entire continent in a short period of time. What about the news that a true god is about to personally descend upon Iradia? Hearing this, Barrett could not help but raise his head and glance at the Black Dragon. After discovering that the Black Emperor's posture was still dignified, he lowered his head again and deliberated before saying, that should specifically depend on which true god it is. Lesser divine power, the god of hunting, the black-blooded beast, Maelor. The Black Dragon interrupted him and added, directly calling out the god's name without any fear. In fact, he could not wait for Maelor to know what he was doing, so that Maelor would be afraid and give up on the idea of going down to the mortal world. Barrett's lowered head jerked up again. He widened his eyes and looked at the ferocious black dragon on the throne in shock. Without using honorifics and directly calling out the god's name, the Black Emperor's words were full of provocation. The possibility revealed in his words made Barrett tremble with fear. At different levels, the perspective of seeing things would naturally be different. For ordinary people, true gods were unattainable, but for Caesar, the lesser divine power mailer was still lacking. Although he still had to use this method to take advantage of the situation to avoid it, after a period of time, he should not be so timid anymore. Seeing the completely indifferent attitude of the Black Dragon Lord, after a long while, Barrett twisted his neck again bit by bit and said nervously, "This kind of news is not easy to spread. The god of hunting is an evil god and is not popular with people. So the news of him going down to the mortal world is difficult to keep the attention of intelligent creatures, and," he said tentatively, "we also don't have any strong evidence to prove the authenticity of news." Yes, there was no evidence. Caesar nodded secretly and then asked, "Then what do you think should be done?" Barrett had already prepared a draft in his mind and gave the answer that a bard should give. People like stories, especially stories that are exciting, interesting, emotional, and logical. If it were up to me, I would design a clever story to package this news so that it would be widely spread and achieve the effect of dissemination. No, Caesar shook his head and rejected directly. That's too slow, and I happen to have no time. The Black Dragon's vertical eye shone. I need a viral effect like an advertisement. Seize the point that mailer is about to descend to Iradia and carry out an overwhelming brainwashing propaganda. Although Barrett did not understand what advertisement meant, he understood the Black Dragon Lord's request. He was a person with a flexible mind, so he immediately nodded and said, "In this case, we can compile a catchy single-line ballad with a nice melody and spread it. The repeated melody will also leave a deep impression on people." A single-line ballad? Caesar automatically replaced it with the brainwashing advertisements from his previous life. "Let's do that." After this association, the Black Dragon nodded with satisfaction. "I will give you the authority to set up a new department in the Rhine Palace. If this matter is done to my satisfaction, you will be in charge of this department from now on." "Definitely." The Black Dragon Lord's promise made Barrett instantly excited. He immediately nodded and said in an excited and resolute tone, "I promise you with my life, Your Majesty." After Barrett left, Caesar summoned Hogg and asked the Knoll leader to keep a close eye on Barrett's progress and report the results at all times. After all, this matter was not child's play. It was a matter of life and death for the Black Dragon. If Barrett's side still did not make any progress after a period of time, the Black Dragon would have no choice but to carry out the final plan. He would use the most unstable and complicated plan, think of ways to obtain the trophy, regardless of the consequences, and then pull the Blackwing's nest to prepare to fight the black-blooded beasts. Chapter 248. The various assembly line factories were under construction, and the personnel were gradually being recruited and prepared. On the other side, the first batch of elegy cards had been fully produced and were all in place. Today was the day that the Blackwing clan would release the standard elegy card to the market. Actually, during the process of production and planning, Caesar had received a lot of questions. The normal low-intelligence monsters of the Blackwing clan naturally did not mind. However, Hogg, who was in charge of this matter, the wild boar man Parful, as well as the workers in every aspect of the production workshop, did not understand what the Black Dragon Lord was trying to do. Although they did not dare to question it, they could not help but mutter in their hearts. In a world like Iradia, where the bottom level of development was extremely low, no ruler would do such a thing like Caesar. And with the thinking of primitive creatures, they could easily guess the true intentions of the Black Emperor. Even Luna, who had always had absolute trust and support for the Black Dragon, was full of confidence after listening to his detailed description. But when she thought about it in private, she could not help but hesitate, unable to believe it to the end. She had reservations about the prospects after the cards were released, as described by the Black Dragon. But Caesar still decided to complete this matter. Psychologists divided the psychological needs of humans, or intelligent creatures, into a total of 5 types: physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, respect needs, and self-actualization needs. Caesar did not lack in food and clothing, so he did not have to worry about this at all. At the same time, the Black Dragon Lord's self-control was also very strong. Otherwise, he would only need to wave his hand in the north, and there would be countless members of the opposite sex coming over. Dragons did not have reproductive isolation, so it was not a problem even for humans. But Caesar did not need it. He only needed to wait for Luna to come of age. In terms of safety needs, in Iradia, no creature could have absolute safety, and it was the same for gods. This point could only be obtained with the continuous growth of the Black Dragon's strength and influence to obtain more safety guarantees. There was no point in being anxious. When it came to socializing, Caesar had the little fellow to confide in and did not need to hide anything. He also had the support of Hog, Nero, and a group of loyal subordinates. When he was free, he could also transform and go to the northern kingdoms to experience life. This was very easy. There was no need to mention the need for respect. He was the emperor of the Northlands and the king of Blackwing's Nest. He had a sufficient status. Even the kings and archdukes of the other countries in the Northlands had to kneel before him and pay their respects, trembling in fear and trepidation. The only thing Caesar was thinking about and pursuing now was the realization of his self-worth. As mentioned before, he did not have much ambition. He just wanted to be a lord who was neither too big nor too small, farming, selling cards, and earning enough money and trophies. If he was bored, he could take the little girl to visit the scenery of other areas in Iradia. Speaking of which, although the things he did were cruel and violent, Black Dragon's vision really wasn't evil. After all, Caesar was not a demon. In 1643 of the Third Era of Iradia, the 43rd day of the rainy season in the northern kingdoms, a total of 100 elegy taverns in the northern kingdoms alliance opened at the same time. This caused quite a commotion. In fact, when the taverns were being built, they had already attracted the attention of the people. 1643 was the second year after the Black Dragon took over the northern kingdoms. Under the strict rule of the Blackwing Palace, the internal situation of the northern kingdoms was gloomy. In order to prevent people from escaping, the Black Emperor strictly prohibited any humans without permission from stepping out of the borders of the northern kingdoms. Just this ban alone had completely cut off the lives of the adventurers. At the same time, he also blocked the trade and exports of the various territories. As a result, the economic standards of the various countries fell again and again, falling to a level that was close to collapse. In the bleak situation of the various countries, there were still people who dared to open taverns, and it was said that there were many of them. Did they think that they had too much money? If they had money, why didn't they take it out and spread it around? The hatred of the rich began to grow, and people gritted their teeth. Many of the refugees who had lost their jobs also had crooked thoughts. They were prepared to wait for these taverns to open for business and make trouble a few times, begging for money. However, when the Elegy Tavern opened for business, everyone with their own ulterior motives immediately burrowed into a hole of shame. Open your eyes wide and take a good look at who was standing outside the tavern to maintain order. Black Robes. The boss behind the tavern was related to the Blackwing Palace. After asking around and exchanging information, the people who were usually bored immediately exploded. It was said that every Elegy Tavern had a black robe standing guard. Everyone, Black Wing above, gods above. This was a direct property of the palace. The people trembled in fear, fearing that 2 monsters would rush out from the tavern. Although it was proven that the Blackwing clan would not harm the people for no reason, it still could not change the inherent impression that the monsters had left on the people. The sun was setting in the west, and Barton ended his day's work. He was a hired worker of the Lord of Cassin City, and the Lord of Cassin City was a new noble conferred by the Blackwing Palace. In this way, he also benefited from it, and could be considered half an internal member of the Blackwing's Nest. This identity was now quite popular in the northern countries, and his status was higher than that of ordinary people. Barton also often dealt with the black robes, so he was not as afraid of them as ordinary people. Therefore, when Barton saw a newly opened tavern guarded by black robes on the main street, he could not help but be curious and stood by the side of the road to take a look. The black robes did not care about him. These lackeys of the Black Wing nest seemed to only be here to maintain order. So Barton's gaze was able to pass through the expensive glass door and look into the tavern. The tavern's layout was not bad. It had a thick solid wood floor, and the black rock walls were carved with dragons and warriors. The counter was at the innermost part of the bottom, and there were small square tables and chairs around it. It was too hot in the north, so there was no fireplace inside. Instead, there was a piece of solid ice that was reinforced by magic. Barton's heart skipped a beat. The furnishings inside were too neat and high-end, and there were even things that had been reinforced by magic. It was not like the messy and dirty tavern in his impression. Instead, it was more like the banquet hall of those nobles, which made him flinch. The unknown would always make people panic and feel uncomfortable. Moreover, this place was related to the Black Wing nest, so Barton was a little timid. He did not dare to try it, and after a few glances, he was ready to turn and leave. At this moment, the black robes who had been chatting at the side suddenly turned their heads, glanced at him, and casually said, "The Elegy Tavern will be opening in a few days, and the drinks will be free." The higher-ups said so. Free? Barton was stunned, afraid that he had heard wrongly. In the Iradia, riding and drinking were one of the few entertainment activities. The former had a high threshold, and alcohol had a wider audience. Both men and women in the north had drunk alcohol, and some even drank it like water, but it was the cheapest kind. If it was really free, this new tavern would probably go bankrupt in a day. Chapter 249. Really, he was a little hesitant and couldn't help but ask in return. The man in black ignored him as if he did not hear him. In the eyes of these people, they were the direct army of the Black Emperor. Their status was much higher than these commoners, so naturally, they did not need to care about commoners. They did not even respect the nobles of the northern lands, not the nobles of the Black Wings. The reason why he had mentioned this earlier was because of an order from the higher-ups. All visitors must be informed of the situation. Barton stood there and hesitated for a while. How could he pretend to be a regular here when it was his first time in such a high-end tavern? In the end, he gritted his teeth, pushed open the door, and walked in. He planned to ask about the price first. If it was not free, he could just turn around and come out again. At most, he would be scolded and chased away. The Black Dragon Code did not state that he was not allowed to ask about the price after entering the tavern. When Barton walked into the Elegy Tavern, he suddenly realized that there were waiters standing on both sides. He seemed to be the tavern's first customer. The quiet and tranquil environment made him feel uneasy again. Fortunately, the person behind the counter gave him enough confidence. He looked familiar. Yes, it was the waiter of the tavern that he used to frequent. It seemed that the tavern had closed down and the waiter had moved. Barton thought for a while and realized that he had not seen him for a long time. "Welcome. Find a seat by the ice stone and sit anywhere." Seeing that the customer had arrived, the waiter smiled. "Also, do you need anything?" Barton stepped forward nervously and looked at the young man with wooden glasses. He opened his mouth and said, "I heard from the man in black outside that the drinks are free for the next few days." He regretted it as soon as he said it. He cursed in his heart. Damn it, that was sudden and rude. However, the waiter still maintained his smile. The salary given to him was very high, and the Elegy Tavern had strict requirements for the waiter, so he had to maintain his professionalism. "Yes, sir. The Elegy Tavern will have free drinks for the next week. But before that, I think you need to pass a small checkpoint." "What checkpoint?" Barton's voice gradually calmed down. After discovering that there were no major problems, his initial nervousness also gradually subsided. The messenger pointed at the wooden board hanging beside him. There were 3 lines of neat handwriting on it. However, since most of the Northlanders were illiterate, he explained, the game is played using the Elegy card. The winner of the game will get a glass of summer blue, another name for summergrass wine. If you win 3 games, you will get a glass of northern Sunday. If you win 10 games, you will get the glory of the Empire. The free drinks can only be consumed in the tavern, and the loser will lose the right to participate that day. Elegy card? What's that? Barton asked, confused. The waiter pointed at the cards in the transparent cabinet. He didn't introduce where they came from, only saying, it's a new card game. During this period, we will provide you with the Elegy deck for free. As long as you don't maliciously damage the cards, you won't have to pay any rent. Then, he turned his head and looked at the door behind Barton. However, there are no players to fight with you right now. If you want to get the reward, you need to find a player to play with you. At that time, our attendants, under the guidance of the waiter's gaze, Barton looked at the other attendants on both sides of the tavern. We'll explain the rules to you. At the same time, they will provide assistance as a game referee to determine the outcome. The entire event was the Black Dragon Lord's idea. Compared to Earth in his previous life, the Iradia humans' thinking was more rigid and slow. Moreover, it had been fixed for thousands of years. This made it difficult for these intelligent species to accept new things, especially things that had no interest in them. They would not be tainted. After all, even if it was a game, there was a learning cost. And in the early stages of the release of the cards, it would be more meaningful for them to spend their time and energy for no reason than to sleep with them. Therefore, in order to prevent the possibility of the Elegy card being used as a cushion after being given away for free, Caesar changed their marketing strategy and launched this event. Using the drinks that the Northlanders were interested in to get the free drinks, these people would naturally work hard to understand the rules and gameplay of the Elegy card after they developed a desire to win. This was also a necessary step in the actual operation. Even if Caesar had optimized the Elegy card to the greatest extent, it would not be as simple and easy to learn as it was in his previous life. This was because in his previous life, many of the randomness and rules had been replaced by programs. Players only needed to spend time on the fun of the game. However, in Iradia, to truly enjoy the fun of the Elegy card, one must first be proficient in the rules of the Elegy card. This was the threshold, and if the threshold was too high, it would bring great harm to an entertainment product. Therefore, the existence of the Elegy Tavern was unavoidable, and so was the free drinks event. This was a marketing investment, and Caesar had already calculated this part of the cost into the initial investment. Okay, Barton nodded without hesitation and prepared to leave. It seemed that this high-end tavern was not as scary as he had imagined. At least until now, there was nothing in the Elegy Tavern that made him feel embarrassed. On the contrary, it was very comfortable and lovable. There were solid ice stones that emitted cold air, and there was also the fragrance of cloves and gooseberries. It was not difficult for Barton to find another player. He did not even need to run onto the street to find someone because his house was not far away. He could totally bring his wife or son along and participate in the so-called Elegy card showdown together. For this reason, Barton had even confirmed one thing. He had personally witnessed the waiter swear to the gods that the winner would definitely receive a cup of summer blue, while the loser would not receive any punishment or pay any price. Wait! Barton walked halfway out and then suddenly turned back. With a mysterious expression, he whispered, "Little Westway, allow me to ask, who is the owner of this tavern? As long as you do not violate the prohibitions in the Black Dragon Code, we can guarantee your absolute safety here. You will not be violated in any way," the waiter at the counter said, loudly with a calm expression, as if he did not hear the customer question. Understood. Barton nodded at him gratefully. If he still could not guess the owner behind the Elegy Tavern with keywords like absolute safety and will not be violated in any way, then his IQ would probably be on par with the orcs. He really did not expect that His Majesty the Emperor would be interested in these things. This was Caesar's little wish. So the Black Dragon had not only focused on Caesar's publicity work for the past 2 days, but also diverted a small part of his energy to pay attention to the feedback from the Elegy card showdown after testing the market. To his surprise, based on the feedback from the Rhine Kingdom, the Elegy Tavern did not cause much of a stir or attract much attention on the first and second day of its opening. Without official publicity, the feedback from the market was not good. It was not until the third day that the Elegy Tavern experienced an explosive increase in customer flow. It was not until the fifth day that the first elegy card pack was sold. This situation had something to do with the atmosphere in the country under the Black Dragon's rule. They were currently in an era of economic depression, and the threshold of desire of the Northlanders had reached the freezing point. After all, they had already been careful and used all their strength just to survive. How could they be interested in other things? However, Caesar knew that with the completion of a few large factories and the provision of work opportunities, the situation of the Northland kingdoms would gradually improve. At the same time, although the Northland kingdoms were prohibited from any trade and exports, the Blackwing court had already begun to purchase furs and wood from other nobles and merchants. Although the purchase price was 10% lower than a market price, as long as it was not forcefully seized, it would more or less ease the economic pressure on the various duchies. Wealth needed to flow, and the more it flowed, the more valuable it was. Once it was locked down, there would only be death. Caesar knew this principle very well. On the other hand, with the completion of the large assembly line factories, it was also time for him to set up a few official import and export caravans of the Blackwing court. In terms of sales channels, he also had to pry them out from the hands of the great nobles and merchants and inherit and integrate them. Chapter 250. The 10 largest free trade city-states in the central region were made up of Coer, Elanti, Bion, as well as the newly built Erin and other large cities. The terrain was complex, making it easy to defend and difficult to attack. If one were to describe it accurately and straightforwardly, this should be the most prosperous and powerful place in Aladia other than the never-setting empire. However, even though the Trade Federation lived alone in the center of the continent, the geographical environment around it was not very good. The Death Swamp, the Savage Desert, the extremely low-temperature plateaus, and the volcano mountain range that never saw a day of peace. There were dangerous places everywhere that made people shrink back. The Trade Federation lived alone in the middle of it, and the environment was as bad as purgatory in a material plane. However, in the world of magic, the harsh environment was not an insurmountable difficulty. The people of the city-states showed wisdom and power far beyond imagination. Connecting swamps, highlands, deserts, and volcanoes, with the Trade Federation as the center, there was a rest stop every 10 miles to serve the merchants, nobles, and adventurers who came and went. In the depths of the Great Swamp, there was an area where it was spring all year round, with lush vegetation and picturesque scenery. This was an environmental transformation brought about by the power of magic. The Trade Federation had an important city located here, the city of Kal, and a surrounding area where the humanoid creatures of Kal lived. However, in such a place, even this miraculous territory had to be maintained at a great cost and a great amount of time. At the edge of the city, there were many inscription towers, shining with the radiance of elements and spells. Black enchanted ballistas and cannons were placed around the city to defend against invading enemies. Elemental golems, powered by magic cores, stood quietly, ready to wake up at any time and burst forth with great power. As one of the top city-states in the Trade Federation, Kal had more than 200,000 residents. The number of people who came and went was uncountable. In such an important city for trade and military, there were more than 30,000 elite soldiers who were fully equipped with enchanted weapons. Including the city lord, there were 3 legends. The scenery in the city was beautiful, and the infrastructure was complete. The entertainment and various commercial activities were very developed. In some aspects, this place could compete with the most luxurious unsetting sun empire. It was called the unsetting city of the central region. In a luxurious mansion in Kal, the governor appointed by the head of state, John Arthur, was dealing with politics. As the strongest legendary sword saint in the top 10 trading city-states, when John Arthur was young, he was the adopted son of the previous head of state, Enkai Gray. The old head of state treated him like his biological father. To this day, John Arthur and Tishanmu Gray still called each other brothers. But now, the legendary sword saint, who was known as the King of Call in name, was actually much more influential than expected. He was deep in thought as he looked at two pieces of information in his own mansion. His handsome face was calm and serious. He had originally thought that the so-called Dragon King in the north was just an old black dragon. Hence, John Arthur was prepared to slay the black dragon single-handedly with his sword to relax and relax at the same time. However, after hearing that the other party had ascended into the legendary realm, John Arthur became vigilant. After being taught by Enkai Grey, he was not a reckless man who did not know his place. Therefore, John Arthur did not hesitate to give up halfway. At the same time, he also paid attention to this matter and sent people to investigate the situation of the Black Dragon in detail. In the end, 2 investigation reports were presented on the mahogany table in front of him. The results of the investigation showed that the Black Dragon Lord in the north had only spent a year to take in all the human forces in the north. Although those Northlanders were scum who had been expelled back then, of course, they were still scum now. It was not easy to destroy all the resistance of those guys in such a short time. If the Trade Federation were to take action, it would at least require the cooperation of 2 cities to attack without using legendary forces. In other words, the Black Dragon in the north was not only not weak, but was actually very strong. Not only that, it must have many followers who were equally fierce. It was a little troublesome. A lore dragon that had become a legend was no longer a bone that could be gnawed by conventional forces. It was not easy to kill such a legendary ancient dragon unless there was war or the use of higher-level forces. Anyway, it was difficult to do it with just John Arthur's strength. So he gave up. It was not that he wanted to let go of the Black Dragon and the scum under it. John Arthur just did not want to take the risk himself. He tapped his finger lightly on the mahogany table, paused, stood up, and went to the study to take out a crystal and a golden leaf. Then, he crushed the crystal and set the golden leaf on fire. In the smoke of the burning golden leaf, the silhouettes of a group of people gradually appeared. "Byron, long time no see," John Arthur said to the people who were drinking around the long table in the picture. "You have business at your door." Adhering to the idea that professional matters should be left to the professionals, John Arthur found Byron. This guy and his people were the most popular and notorious dragon hunters in the whole of Iradia today. There were a total of 12 core members. Among these 12 people, every one of them was an experienced legendary adventurer. In addition, Byron had 3 vassals who dealt with chores for him and could be replenished at any time. In each group, there were more than 50 staff members who only served the 12 of them. The most illustrious record of this group of people was that on the island volcano in the Sea of Stars, they besieged and killed the powerful ancient red dragon Aksui, who was known as the Queen. Aksui was the most active dragon in Iradia today. Although it was not a lore dragon, it was very difficult to deal with. It made several vassal states of the empire on which the sun never sets anxious. After a year of preparation, the dragon hunters who were employed by the kingdom of Gonor, one of the vassals of the sun never sets, finally caught the red dragon when it attacked and robbed again. After 3 days and 2 nights of continuous pursuit, they finally locked it in an extinct volcano on a small island in the sea and finally cut off its head. It was said that when Aksui died, the extinct volcano, which had been dormant for many years, miraculously erupted again, and the earthquake in the sea continued. Afterward, this move spread throughout Iradia, and the value of Byron and his team directly doubled. They were also different from other adventurers and were called dragon hunters. Hey, old man. Byron and John Arthur were very familiar with each other. When John Arthur was young, he hid his identity and went on adventures with them. "It's really rare that you still remember me. A powerful evil dragon has appeared again, and the prestige of Call has been challenged. I need you to erase the stain for it," John Arthur calmly stated, and then smiled. "Of course, isn't slaying dragons also what you are best at?" "I never said that." Byron shook his head. "Tell me, what is the target? Let's make it clear first, we will not take the red dragon. Aksui is already the 4th red dragon that we have killed. It's not a red dragon, it's a black dragon." John Arthur narrowed his eyes. "A legendary ancient black dragon that rules the northern countries. Are you interested?" After a pause, he added, I can provide you with the target's location, target information, and other support. You just need to kill the dragon. We don't need your information. We only believe in our own eyes and judgment. BYFF smacked his lips and took out a map from his bosom to look at it. The northern kingdoms are here. It's too far, and the other party is a lord dragon. It may not be easier to deal with an Aksui. Why are you scared? John Arthur provoked. He stared at the king of coal, John Arthur, for a long time before saying, you have to pay more. Okay. Chapter 251. Not to mention the professional dragon hunters that John Arthur was hiring, and not to mention the god of the hunt, Malor, who was preparing to descend upon Iradia, Caesar had other troubles. At this time, the righteous gods who were biased towards humans were also gathering manpower. After all, the influence of the Black Dragon ruling over the northern countries was no longer limited to the northern region. It was fine for an evil dragon to run amok and commit crimes, but if an evil dragon couldn't suppress its desire for power and ambition and wanted to rule over the humans, it would cause a lot of problems. At least, that was the case in Eladia. After all, humans were the most numerous race on this continent, and they were also the ones who provided the most faith. The Black Dragon Lord's actions of enslaving humans and suppressing temples in his territory had already caused dissatisfaction among the righteous gods, led by Quel'Khazad, since they did not want the North to truly become the evil territory of an evil dragon, then destroying, or at least sealing, the Black Dragon. Caesar Tangerine became the #1 goal of the believers of the gods. However, what the Black Dragon Lord did not expect was that the first person to come to his door was not a righteous warrior who fought to the death. Hello, your majesty Caesar, the Black Emperor in people's mouths. When this outsider who looked like a young man came to visit and arrived at the Blackwing Palace, Caesar's pupils immediately shrank, and he quickly entered a state of alertness. At the same time, he turned sideways to block the passage behind the palace, lowered his head, and stared at the person who came. Legendary. Hello, outsider. This was the first time Caesar had seen a legendary creature from the main matter plane of Eladia. The legendary primitive man who had been possessed by a god and was forcefully pulled out of the plane did not count. A true legendary creature was far more powerful than the projection of Malor, who could not adapt to a humanoid body. However, the Black Dragon who had stepped on the path of psionic power already had some sensory abilities. He could see that the young man in front of him was not hostile. After seeing the Black Dragon sitting on the throne, the man spoke in a very familiar tone. Outside of the northern kingdoms, people see you as one of the sources of evil in Iradia, the successor of Aksui, and the leader of the evil dragons. However, based on what I've seen so far, that doesn't seem to be the case. At the very least, the lives of the poor and slaves under your rule are not bad. As he spoke, the young man's tone carried a hint of mockery. At least he's much friendlier than those vile human nobles. Of course, I'm the Black Dragon who loves harmony. Iradia has a lot of misunderstandings about me, Caesar replied out of politeness. Of course, this sentence did not live up to its name. The leader of the evil dragons. Sorry, other than Garen and Black Dragon, the Black Dragon Lord had not welcomed a third dragon to pledge allegiance to him. He was completely disappointed in the Black Dragon clan. However, after this, he keenly noticed that the guy in front of him did not seem to be a human. The way he spoke was not quite right. If it was a normal human, the word human would not naturally come out of his mouth. Outsider, state your identity and intentions. After realizing this, Caesar suddenly said, even if the other party did not seem to be hostile, he did not like people talking to him in a disguised manner. Sorry. The man smiled. This guy did not hide anything and began to remove some of the spells used for disguise. Thus, in a light of magic, a huge golden dragon smashed through the light spots and appeared in front of Caesar. This was an ancient golden dragon. It was very powerful. Dense golden scales formed a majestic pattern on its body. Its head was slightly smaller than the red dragon and ranked second among the dragon species. The horns on its head curved backwards, forming the shape of a crown. Its eyes were small and protruding, sharp and full of wisdom. Due to its slender neck, although the golden dragon was not as strong as Caesar, it appeared to be bigger than the black dragon. "Please allow me to introduce myself," he said with a gentle smile. "Gold-plated wildfire, Carl Duramplet Stannis has come from afar to pay you a visit." Black Dragon, Caesar Tangerine. The golden dragon named Stannis did not call Caesar Dragon King, even though he already knew this title. However, to the true dragons, it was impossible for them to acknowledge it. Among the metal dragons, golden dragons were also known as enforcers of justice. They were the opposite of the evil dragons. Their blood flowed with a strong and boiling desire to punish evil and eliminate evil. They practiced their own ideals and were full of the desire to protect the weak. When it came to the gold dragons, the most interesting and impressive thing was that, in order to punish evil, the gold dragons generally liked to disguise themselves as rich scholars and merchants who did not have any fighting ability. They traveled alone or followed weak mercenary groups to some dangerous areas. They would wait for evil to come, or when evil was about to do evil, they would return to their true form to capture or kill the evil. Caesar called this fishing law. However, this guy was a little different. He could actually suppress his boiling desire to eliminate evil and did not fight with him. This situation was slightly unusual among the golden dragons. However, considering that the other party was an ancient golden dragon who had lived for thousands of years, it was natural for him to be able to restrain his nature. "Hello, welcome." Caesar's voice was neither servile nor overbearing, giving the other party just the right amount of respect. Like the golden dragon, Caesar was not an evil dragon who was controlled by his natural instincts, and his self-control was not weak. After the other party showed a friendly attitude, Caesar would not make an enemy for himself for no reason. Moreover, it was such a powerful enemy. The golden dragon Stannis soon began to chat with Caesar. As a noble's friend, the golden dragon was quite good at starting a conversation. Unlike the evil dragons who were hated by people, the metal dragons had a good relationship with humans. Many of the golden dragons were even invited by their parents to raise them when they were young by noble families with good moral character and qualifications, including but not limited to the royal family. After listening to Stannis's confused and rambling for a while, Caesar found that he was not good at such communication and topics, and he was not interested in it. So he found an opportunity and asked politely, "Okay, my friend, as the ruler of a country, I have a lot of things to do. Perhaps you can speak frankly. If you want, we can talk about the rest another day. You see, Caesar, I know that your nature is not bad, but it's not good to be so impatient." Although Stannis was nagging, he finally explained the purpose of his visit. "I can see that you are not a believer of Her Majesty Tiamat. If you yearn for and pursue a higher quality, why not give yourself a chance and try to pray for guidance from Her Majesty Bahamut?" So it was the will of the platinum dragon god, Caesar thought. It seemed that Bahamut had also noticed him and also knew the potential of the abnormal body. However, compared to the evil dragon mother who was straightforward, the platinum dragon god hoped to persuade the black dragon through gentle means and obtain the black dragon's faith. This was not surprising. Even among the Penishade dragons, who were full of evil and wildness, there were also freaks who abandoned evil and believed in the platinum dragon god and became a warrior of justice. Bahamut's position in Caesar's heart was much more important than that of Tiamat, the mother of evil dragons. Bahamut was the true king of good dragons. When communicating with him, there was no need to consider problems such as conspiracies and lies. Fighting and scheming was quite a headache for Caesar. On the other hand, the platinum dragon god had a very good reputation. Even if he did not have the same power as Tiamat, although Bahamut also had many enemies, he had more friends. Even if he lost all his power, the platinum dragon god would still be able to do well in the endless realms. Caesar thought about it. He had no intention of dismissing the king of the good dragon's face. Although this pure and kind dragon god might not care about face at all, there were still some things he had to consider. Chapter 252. Yes, compared to the evil dragon mother, I am more willing to listen to the guidance and teachings of the platinum dragon god. Caesar looked at the legendary ancient dragon in front of him and shook his head. But if His Majesty Bahamut investigates carefully, he will discover that due to some special reason, I am temporarily unable to provide faith to the great platinum dragon god. It is very regrettable. I think you seem to have some misunderstandings. Caesar. Stannis looked into his eyes. The two dragons looked at each other. The golden dragon's voice was gentle but did not lose its majesty. Faith is actually just my one-sided words. In fact, even His Majesty does not care about this. As long as you agree with the ideals of the Platinum Dragon God and carry out the teachings of the Good Dragon King, after the test of time, you can become one of us. Even if you are a dragon with a variant body that cannot provide faith, His Majesty Bahamut will not reject you. You must know that we are not doing this for benefits. Well said. Caesar nodded to himself. At least in the matter of dealing with variant bodies, Bahamut was much better than Tiamat. However, the Platinum Dragon God was the king of good dragons. His doctrines and ideals were true and pure justice, including but not limited to equality and friendliness, protecting the weak, punishing evil. Regardless of the reason, believers could not betray their doctrines to achieve their goals. This concept sounded beautiful, but Caesar could not put it into practice. Putting aside the fact that he could not achieve such pure kindness and justice, this guy was not alone now. He was the emperor of Blackwing's Nest, the northern kingdoms. Following the teachings of the Platinum Dragon God might be able to become a revered example of justice, but he would definitely not be able to become a qualified ruler. This was because the hearts of those who played politics were all dirty. As a ruler, what they pursued was benefits. In this, it was very difficult to distinguish right from wrong with pure good and evil. For example, if the northern kingdoms were unable to be self-sufficient and food was more precious than life, and at this time, intelligence showed that another kingdom had a large amount of food stockpiled, would the Black Dragon Lord rob it? If the population of the Blackwing Empire was saturated in the future, Caesar would have to expand his territory, and his territory would be occupied by other kingdoms. Would the Black Dragon Lord start a war? If there is a choice, yes. That would definitely go against the teachings of the Platinum Dragon God and hurt the other countries. However, if they did not take action, the Blackwing Empire would not be able to hold on. It was unknown how many people would lose their lives in the famine and chaos. Therefore, Caesar couldn't do it. Of course, the Black Dragon could not directly reject Stannis, so he used the human way of negotiating. You are right, Gold Dragon. If possible, I will do my best to follow the ideals of the Platinum Dragon God and push myself. I hope so. An ancient golden dragon that had lived for 1,000 years was not so easily deceived. Moreover, Stannis was a follower of the Platinum Dragon God and was more intelligent than the average golden dragon. That was why he could easily tell that the Black Dragon was trying to evade the responsibility. However, in his opinion, this was not important. As long as the Black Dragon Lord did not directly reject him, it was fine. The other party was not an evil dragon that believed in the evil path of Tiamat. From the short conversation, Stannis could tell that the Black Dragon Caesar did indeed respect the Platinum Dragon God and had a slight yearning for it. That was enough. Stannis believed that His Majesty would sooner or later let this black dragon with great potential in front of him embark on their path of ultimate good. The Platinum Dragon God's vision could see through appearances and see the essence of things. That was why they knew very well that this so-called Dragon King was actually just a young dragon. To be honest, when he first heard this, even a knowledgeable Stannis found it hard to believe. Regarding the judgment of the Black Dragon Caesar, whether it was the ancient golden dragon Stannis or the Platinum Dragon God Bahamut, they did not think that they were wrong. That was because, judging from the Black Dragon's actions so far, the Black Dragon's actions had a clear purpose and would not do evil because of his emotions. This made them feel that Caesar was not a hopeless Pinochet dragon, and that there was a possibility of guiding him to the right path. After a back-and-forth exchange of pleasantries, Stannis' goal was almost achieved. That was why he gradually changed the topic and asked the Black Dragon to visit his territory to test him further. This was absolutely impossible for the Penishade dragons. The stinginess and narrow-mindedness of the Penishade dragons did not allow them to do so. However, Caesar was very generous and allowed Stannis to visit the Blackwing Kingdom as he wished. He even allowed the Golden Dragon to visit the Blackwing clan's living conditions. When he saw the humans under the rule of the Black Dragon Lord, Stannis did not feel that there was any problem. After all, one's position determined one's head. He was a dragon and naturally would not stand up for the humans when Caesar did not do anything that angered the heavens. To be honest, when he saw the humans submitting to the dragons, Stannis did not know why, but he felt a little satisfied. However, that was all. The Blackwing Kingdom was in the process of being rebuilt. In the eyes of the ancient Golden Dragon who had traveled all over the continent, and even the astral plane, it did not feel that there was anything strange about it. It can only be said to be average. This was a city that was barely decent in the north of Iradia. That was all. However, after seeing the Blackwing clan, the ancient Golden Dragon Stannis suddenly felt a little uneasy and could not help but mutter in his heart. Although in his eyes, the orcs, gnolls, hound demons, and wyverns were all trash, their strict and orderly living conditions made Stannis have no choice but to pay attention to them. He felt that there was a need to report this to His Majesty Bahamut. It was not that Stannis had not seen the Penishade dragons before. He had even dealt with the Penishade dragons that were more powerful and ferocious than the Black Dragon Caesar. He had also broken out in war, but such a system and living conditions among his kin was unique. It was definitely impossible for the other Penishade dragons to do so. After sending off the legendary ancient Golden Dragon, who left in a hurry, the figure of the leader of the gnolls appeared in front of Caesar. Hogg held a piece of parchment in his hand and came forward to report the situation. He was the kin who understood the Black Dragon Lord the most and knew Caesar's habits and preferences, so he did not say much and directly reported in the simplest way. Your Majesty, the publicity department set up by the bards has begun to show results. Hogg took the initiative to point out the topic and then added, after Barrett left the northern kingdoms, he has been recruiting bards everywhere he went. We have seen the results. The rumor that the god of the hunt is about to descend has begun to spread everywhere. However, according to our evaluation, Barrett has been recruiting bards with all his might. It seems that he is expanding his power privately. Your Majesty, should we reduce the financial support given to him? No need. The previous evaluation of the budget is not less. Get all to him. Caesar shook his head and said, as long as this guy can do this well, it doesn't matter if there are more publicity departments. It will also be good for the future work. However, if Barrett does not spread the news to the south within 2 months, our shapeshifters are always by his side. Hogg lowered his head and said softly, very good. Chapter 253. Is this place really ruled by evil dragons? Why does it look like the internal situation of the northern kingdoms is not bad? In a tavern called Roast Meat and Wine, in Cassin City, a group of outsiders dressed like adventurers put down the wine glasses in their hands. The one who spoke was a woman named Messiah Darrow. Her professional habits made this thief's eyes unusually sharp. She seemed to inadvertently take in everything around her. Although she was not young, there were still some freckles on her nose. Because she always chewed tobacco day and night, her teeth had been dyed a frightening dark red. It is indeed not bad. At least it is better than the evil dragon territories we have seen before. Her voice was not loud, but it was just enough to reach her companion's ears. After a period of travel, they had arrived in the northern kingdoms. They had taken the road from the Lackland Kingdom to Rhine and planned to rest in Cassin City for the time being. They ducked through the dusty attic and crossed the old and narrow stairs to enter the tavern. Based on their previous experience, the tavern was usually the easiest place to get information. The hall was not big, but the ventilation was good. There was a row of yellow wooden wine barrels in the corner. Although the door was always open, it was still very hot. The waiter of the tavern flipped the roast meat fork in his hand. The thief Darrow poured black beer from the barrel, and the tobacco in his mouth did not stop chewing. "Hey, buddy, please get us something to eat," their companions called out. There was no one at the long table other than the 13 of them. There was not even a harp singer. After waiting for a while, the waiter served bread, stewed vegetable soup, and a whole roast fork on a plate. When he was about to turn and leave, Darrow tugged at the corner of the waiter's shirt and stuffed a golden bean into his hand. The thief boldly looked at the waiter's face, and in an almost interrogative tone, she asked who the ruler of the northern kingdoms was, were the dragons nearby, what was the latest news, and so on. The series of questions was like a cannon, and the waiter could not react in time. After a while, the waiter realized what she had asked. He looked at them with a surprised and doubtful gaze, and his tone was almost shocked. "You are outsiders? What? Don't we look like foreign adventurers?" The thief thought it was strange. He lowered his head and looked at his attire, then said, "Hey, kid, you haven't answered my question." The pupils of the underage attendant trembled slightly, as if he had recalled something terrible. The young man's lips quivered, and in the end, he put the golden bean back on the table. "I don't know." He made a sound and quickly shook his head. "I can't say." "Hey, I say." The thief was a little anxious and stood up, but BYFF pulled him back. "Don't cause trouble." BYFF educated the new member, then picked up the golden bean and stuffed it into the young man's arms again. At the same time, he changed the topic and asked, "Friend, tell me what you can say. For example, why is this tavern's business so bleak? Also, where can we go to find out what we want?" His gentle tone made the attendant's face look better. He thought for a moment and said, "Our business hasn't been good recently. There are fewer and fewer customers. But you can go to the Elegy Tavern. I heard there are many people there." "Thank you." BYFF thanked him politely and remembered the name in his heart. Then he cut a piece of brown roasted meat with hot gravy from the fork in front of him. Then he plucked a plump mushroom from another fork, dipped it in onions and chili, and began to eat with black beer. Other than Darrow, the other dragon hunters were not in a hurry. They slowly enjoyed the taste of the delicacies of the northern lands. When they were full, BYFF smacked his lips and stood up from the wooden stool. He picked up the long cloth bag leaning against the corner of the table. "Let's go," he said. "Let's go to that place first and see if we can get some useful things. Then we'll go to the Rhine Kingdom." The dragon hunters followed the attendant's guidance and began to walk in the direction of the Elegy Tavern. It was silent all the way, but as they crossed the winding road and got closer, the people on both sides gradually increased. At least, it was not as lifeless as before. At this moment, the clanging of armor, the neighing of horses, and the splashing of rain came from the road. Their expressions froze. "Cavalry," BYFF whispered. The experienced adventurers could read enough information just by the sound. They were dragon hunters and were more proficient in this field. At the same time, BYFF carried the long cloth bag on his back without leaving a trace. Before they found the black dragon and Caesar, they did not want to cause any trouble or attract any attention. It would be best if they could avoid all eyes and ears. The sound of horse hooves gradually approached. The dragon hunters followed the sound and saw a group of people and horses marching in a column. The cavalry was fully armed and stepped over small puddles of water with cold faces. BYFF and his companions moved aside and let this group of people go ahead. This cavalry looked a little different from the army they had met before. They did not have a flag. Even in the city, their faces were covered by overlapping helmets and could not be seen clearly. However, when they passed by, these ferocious cavalry in black armor suddenly reined in their horses and stopped. "Outsiders." The leader of the cavalry turned his horse around. His sharp eyes, covered by his helmet, swept across the faces of BYFF and his companions. His words were full of condescension. "Do you have proof that you have passed the border inspection?" "Of course, sir. We are adventurers from the swamp." Darrow was the first to answer. At the same time, he snickered in his heart. This small place actually imitated the empire where the sun never sets and implemented border inspection and entry registration. However, They did not have the ability to supervise and place and implement an independent household registration system. As long as they walked through the main entrance, anyone could walk in openly. The cavalry leader stared at the paper they took out. He looked at it for a while and then threw it back to the bandits. This was just a routine inspection of outsiders during patrol. The black-robe bandits did not pay much attention to it. They said, "In the north, you have to abide by the rules of the north." Then they rode away. The dragon hunters, who had strong mental fortitude, did not have any emotional fluctuations. They continued to walk forward. After passing a lazy curve, they saw their destination, the Elegy Tavern. However, for soldiers in black armor also appeared in their line of sight. However, they did not seem to be the same group of people. BYFF judged that they did not have horses with them. He glanced at them casually and found that these soldiers were on guard duty. They would not stop visitors, so there was nothing to worry about. He casually stepped into the tavern that was opened in the center of Caston City. BYFF had been an adventurer when he was young. Now, he had become a well-known adventurer. Over the years, he had traveled extensively and seen countless taverns in various places. However, he had rarely seen a tavern that was packed with people, had a lively atmosphere, and was not noisy. "Not bad, but I have the king of the Black Wings. War roar. Sorry, fireball spell. My magic will tear you to pieces." As soon as he stepped through the door, BYFF heard voices. He was a little confused. What was going on? What were the customers of this tavern talking about? Chapter 254. The words King of the Black Wing and Fireball had attracted the attention of the dragon hunters from the very beginning. BYFF curiously looked in the direction of the voice and found two young men dressed in freedmen's attire sitting at the square table, as well as a tavern waiter. The two freemen were ordinary people, not spellcasters, and the so-called Blackwing King was even more nonsense. BYFF glanced at the other places and took in the layout of the tavern. He then found that most of the customers sitting down were in the same arrangement. 3 people to a table, and some of them were surrounded by onlookers. However, there was no situation like ordinary taverns where a group of people were drinking at a table, making malicious jokes and bragging. In the Elegy Tavern, most people's attention was not on the wine. They were holding something else in their hands, a card in their hands. BYFF could not see the front of those cards, but those words came out of the mouths of the guys holding the cards. The dragon hunter took a few glances and became suspicious. He pretended to move casually and moved closer to the table closest to him. "Grand Duke Lionheart, you actually have such a card? My God, how many Northern Rhine expansion packs did you buy?" Barton held a standard module of the Elegy card in his hand. It was a magic card with mind control written on it. Gain control of an enemy follower. But fortunately, in this round, he's mine. Looking at the dragon hunter's livid face, Barton held back his laughter. The back of the card was completely different from the standard card. It was engraved with the pattern of a sword and an axe, and put on his side. End of round. Grand Duke Lionheart reduced the cost of all cards in my hand by 1. He continued, "Now it's your turn. I bought 11 packs, and that's still not enough. Did you hear the shout just now? Someone got the legendary card, Blackwing King." The freedman sitting across from Barton replied to his previous question. Because both sides were rather familiar with each other, this table didn't have an attendant who was proficient in the rules as a referee. He said, "I advise you to stop playing this class. It really is infuriating." Barton had been playing the Elegy card for quite some time. After all, he had been here since the first day the Elegy Tavern opened. He was one of the first people to come into contact with the Elegy card after it was released. In the eyes of others, Barton was a veteran player with considerable authority. Under the Black Dragon Lord's adjustments, the deck of Elegy had been simplified quite a bit. Currently, there were only 5 classes available: Warrior, Mage, Rogue, Paladin, and Priest. After a week of experience, everyone swarmed over to choose the Warrior and Mage classes. Barton spent an entire night at home researching and pondering. In the end, he found a new path and chose the Priest class. As it turned out, he was right. After constant debugging of the deck, he found that the priest card series was quite applicable and extremely powerful. It was not inferior to the popular mage card series at all. Shield Bash. Pierce through Grand Duke Ryan. Place the shield in my grave. At this time, the freedman across from him took out another expansion card. After removing the card on the opponent's table, he said, activate the skill again and add 2 points of armor for me. Over. TSK, TSK. This time, it was Barton's turn to feel uncomfortable. Each card in the expansion pack is more powerful than the last. During this process, BYFF remained silent and quietly watched from the side. In such a short period of time, BYFF had already analyzed that the opponent should be playing some kind of game. Since it was a game, as the leader of the legendary Dragon Hunters, he naturally would not be too interested in it. However, the words Grand Duke Ryan and King of the Black Wings greatly aroused BYFF's curiosity. Thus, when he saw that the two seemed to have finished their game and began to tidy up the table, BYFF seized the opportunity and lightly touched Barton's shoulder. When the commoner dressed as a craftsman turned around, he said, sorry to disturb you, friend. May I ask, the game you were playing just now? Could you let me try it out? Legends were different from ordinary people. Even if BYFF was originally a lowly peasant, he could now perfectly disguise himself as an ordinary adventurer. However, the confidence and confidence in his words could never be naturally formed by ordinary mercenaries. If it were an ordinary person, they would probably stand on the side and watch others play an unknown game. Only after watching for a long time and thinking that they had a certain understanding of the game would they dare to carefully try it out for fear of embarrassing themselves. However, BYFF was different. He did not know how to play, and there was nothing to hide. The Dragon Hunters did not care about such things. Of course, Barton turned his head and looked at the adventurer who was about the same age as him and dressed in ordinary clothes. He revealed a friendly smile and then looked at the adventurer's hand. But now, the time for the free experience has passed. If you want to start the game, you have to have your own set of cards. This requires money to buy. BYFF understood the meaning behind Barton's words. Yes. Barton nodded. Recently, the popularity of the Elegy card had allowed ordinary people to enjoy the taste of being a class. Everyone in the streets and alleys were discussing the problems of card sets and classes and arguing over which one was stronger and which one was weaker. Word of mouth spread, and many people who didn't know about it before were attracted to it. Many newcomers would ask this question, and Barton was already used to it. There was nothing strange about it. He explained, it's not expensive to buy a class bag alone. It only costs 5 coppers. 5 copper. BYFF noted down this number in his heart. This price was not expensive at all. On the contrary, it was too cheap. Not to mention legendary mercenaries. Even ordinary poor people could afford it. Note that the poor were not free citizens. The status of the poor was only slightly higher than the lowest class of slaves. Is that so? BYFF thought so in his mind, but his face showed an embarrassed expression, as if he was embarrassed and calculating. He asked, friend, can I ask, can this thing only be used here? Where did it come from? There are elegy taverns in every city in the northern lands. They can all be used. Barton said, but we don't know if there are any outside. After all, we can't go out. As for where it came from, everyone knows, but it's hard to say. Think about who can put the King of the Blackwing in the expansion pack, and you'll understand. He waved his hand, turned back, and shuffled the cards with his friends on the opposite side, starting the game again. Thank you. BYFF did not ask further. He had already seen someone opening the card pack at the tavern counter from the corner of his eye, knowing how to buy it. Messiah. He looked around and pulled out the thief who was standing on his tiptoes and stretching his neck to watch from another table. He said, go buy it and take a look. I heard that the King of the Blackwing is inside. I saw that there are words at the bottom of their cards. See what's written on it. Maybe it's the information we want. Yes, please wait a moment. Hearing this, Messiah Darrow responded excitedly. The thief was younger than the people in the other teams. He was full of curiosity and had no resistance to new things. Hearing the leader's words, he immediately jogged to the counter in high spirits. She could not wait any longer. If she was not on a mission, she would have already fought with the other customers. Chapter 255. After several renovations, the current Blackwing Royal Court of the Northern Kingdoms was extremely luxurious. The floor was covered with a dark red Elantra carpet instead of the bare marble from before. The texture was very good, and there were battle lizardmen in charge of cleaning it every half a day. In the corner of the hall, there was a summer screen from the Southern Islands. It was wide and eye-catching, and there were hundreds of vivid and colorful strange beasts painted on it. On the steel walls, there were carved and enchanted diamond-shaped ice stones hanging on crystal chains every 5 meters. On both sides of the Blackwing Royal Court's gate, there were a pair of miniature dragon statues. They were in the posture of spreading their wings and roaring. Round red garnets were used as their eyes, making their black marble faces look bright and lively. Their 4 claws were decorated with elemental black steel, making them look fierce and threatening. Caesar had just woken up from his nap when Hogg, who was the closest to him among the court attendants, walked in. "Your Majesty, from the situation during this period, the sales of the elegy card have achieved a huge growth and are still increasing. Is that so?" The black dragon shook his head and completely woke up from his daze. The elegy card did not receive a crazy popularity as soon as it was released. Instead, it received a gratifying growth after a period of time. This was within Caesar's expectations, because people would always subconsciously resist new things. This was normal. However, with the increase of familiarity and the gradual spread of word of mouth, the elegy card would eventually occupy the empty market of the entertainment industry. However, these sales can't solve the problem. Caesar scratched his chin and said, "In the Northern Kingdoms, it was not easy to make ordinary people willingly fork out money without resorting to violent means. Because the Northern Kingdoms were poor, ordinary people did not have money to begin with, so they would be even more careful with their spending. Even if the Black Dragon Lord set the price of the elegy card deck at only 5 copper coins, it was still enough to make them hesitate for a while. No one knew that the price of 5 copper coins was completely the Blackwing Royal Court's par price, or even a loss. Only the Black Dragon Lord, who had an assembly line workshop, could sell it like this. On the other hand, the expansion packs for 5 pieces of 10 copper coins could make some money, but even so, including the cost of manpower, time, and materials, the Blackwing Royal Court's gains did not make up for the losses. Get everyone to prepare. The collector's edition will be released the day after tomorrow." Caesar said that he had spent so much time and effort to gather so many players just for this day. It was almost time to reap the profits. In addition, the expansion pack for the Undead domain has been in production for some time. Taking advantage of this popularity, we'll release it together with the collector's edition. Compared to the Hearthstone in Caesar's mind from his previous life, the changes to the elegy card deck were huge. In order to adapt to the real world, even the core gameplay had been changed. In the elegy card deck, the number of standard cards for each class was limited. The expansion packs were the main components. On the other hand, the Blackwing Royal Court maintained the speed of half a year's update. As time passed, more and more expansion packs would be released to the market. After the establishment of the Department of Truth, Publicity Department, Caesar felt that it was necessary to establish a new department to be in charge of the operations of the elegy brand and other commercial activities. After all, if Caesar had to think and arrange everything by himself, he would be so busy that his feet wouldn't touch the ground. He wouldn't even have time to whisper to little Luna. In the end, he was just lazy. Moreover, this guy was really thinking too much. In fact, during this period of time, the one who was really busy was Hogg. On the other hand, the Black Dragon only needed to lie on the throne and give some orders. For example, now that he heard Caesar say this, Hogg immediately nodded and accepted the order. The collector's edition and the Undead Domain expansion pack will be released at the same time. Understood, I'll arrange it. Right, now it's on the right track. Reduce the output of the legendary and epic cards. Don't set the minimum output of 100 packs of one legendary card like before. Reduce it again. The rare and precious cards are good for maintaining the game environment and the game's lifespan. Ask the wild boar people to be careful when they seal the packs. Caesar reminded him. The people who carried out the sealing work were all wild boar people. At this stage, the staff could easily do something to the card packs, such as making marks, putting labels, and other small actions. They had to be guarded against privately buying or seeking benefits. Therefore, the process of sealing the packs was done by the special clans in Blackwing's Nest. Caesar had enough confidence in the character of the wild boar people. One last thing. After Hogg nodded and noted it down, Caesar said again. This time, the huge black dragon climbed up from the throne and said, "After you go down, call the leader of the flying ape tribe over." These winged apes that originally lived in the Mostel Canyon had migrated to the Blackwing Kingdom under the orders of the Black Dragon Lord. Of course, Caesar did this for a purpose. When the flying ape leader arrived at the palace, he did not stand on ceremony and asked, "Previously, I sent a team of black shirts to you to teach your people how to use the elegy card. How is it now? Have you learned it?" Your will is our mission. The flying ape tribe will never forget. Before the flying ape leader could salute, it heard the black dragon's question. It did not dare to say much and nodded at the same time as it complimented him. Since stepping into the legendary realm, the Black Dragon Emperor's power had been increasing day by day. Due to the path of psionic energy, even if he did not get more trophies, Caesar's power was steadily increasing. The increasing power would cause people and monsters to feel despair, and they would no longer have any other thoughts. The flying ape tribe was one of them. "So, you've learned it?" Caesar lifted his chin. "Very good. Later, let the flying apes pack up, bring your people, and prepare to leave for Casson City. The shape-shifting monsters and black shirts there will provide you with support." Casson City, one of the few relatively prosperous cities in Lion Duchy, was located at the border between Lion Duchy and Lion Duchy. Due to the Black Dragon Emperor's rule in the north, the entire border was completely sealed off. Now, in Casson City, there were more people moving around than in Khaki territory. After all, people were not allowed to leave the countries in the north. However, Lion, Fey, and other countries were still connected. The internal activities of the countries in the north continued. Understand, the Black Dragon Emperor's words were full of unquestionable meaning. The flying ape leader did not dare to refuse. However, it could not help but hesitate and ask, "But, Your Majesty, you want us to go to Cassan. What should we do after we get there?" "Find a place to stay in Cassan City, then look for humans and play cards," Caesar said seriously. It did not seem like he was joking at all. He even warned it seriously. "Also, remember, the rules in the Black Dragon Code are not only obeyed by humans. It is the same for you non-privileged clans." "Yes, Your Majesty." The flying ape leader nodded. When it realized that the Black Dragon Emperor had no intention of explaining, it could only leave with doubts. At the current stage, Caesar's ultimate goal was to create an empire where many races lived together. However, everything was difficult in the beginning. How to let the monster clans and humans interact and live together harmoniously was a big problem that was difficult to solve at the moment. After thinking about it, the Black Dragon Lord decided to go from easy to difficult. He would start with the flying apes, gnolls, orcs, and other humanoid races. He would then start to integrate with humans and gradually change their views. Of course, that would not be enough. Even if the flying apes were to be forcibly settled in Casson City, it would be meaningless if they did not interact with humans in the end. That was why Caesar had the flying apes learn how to use the elegy card. He would start with the commonalities and promote interaction. Caesar drew a circle on the map of the countries in the north, Casson City. It would be the first city where he experimented with the mixing of different races. Chapter 256. Messiah Darrow's hands were trembling. The path of a thief was all about being ruthless. When it was time to strike, they would not be soft-hearted. As a legendary thief who could be called a mentor by half of the continent's professionals and a member of the Dragon Hunter team, Darrow's hands had not trembled for almost 10 years. The last time she had trembled was when she had just started out and faced a dragon for the first time. That was an adult blue dragon. The violent dragon's aura had caused Darrow, who was still very young, to be at a loss and tremble. After so many years, Darrow's hands trembled once again. She was angry. To be able to reach the legendary realm at the age of 30, her talent was unquestionable for humans. She was even more talented than her dragon hunter predecessors. What Darrow lacked now was experience and mentality. However, it was hard to imagine that such a talented legendary thief would become a weakling that everyone could bully in an extremely simple game. After Darrow figured out the rules, she had lost to an ordinary person 7 times in a row. On the other hand, the other party was merely a commoner with shallow knowledge and vulgarity. Legends had their pride. Darrow's self-esteem and competitiveness would not allow this to happen to her. Even if it was just a small card game, Darrow would not allow herself to be defeated so many times. However, I admit you won. Daluo admitted defeat once again. When she saw the artisan-dressed freedman smile turn into a brilliant Yanin flower, she already wanted to flip the table and beat him up. Damn it! Darrow gritted her teeth and clenched her fists tightly. She really wanted to find the designer of these cards, grab him by the collar, and question him. Why? Why can't a thief be a match for a priest? She had already done an in-depth study of the rules and calculated every step of the game carefully. However, she was still unable to turn the situation around. She could only watch as her opponent reaped the fruits of victory and was humiliated again and again. How could this be? Darrow's eyes gradually turned red. She had to become stronger. I want to buy expansion packs, she said firmly to herself. In fact, she had bought expansion packs at BYFF's suggestion from the very beginning. However, those cards were for research purposes, so she had only picked a few expansion packs for Blackwing's Nest. However, the Blackwing's Nest expansion pack was more suitable for mages and priests, while the expansion card suitable for rogues was in the Elven Forest. She had already done her research. I want the Elven Queen, and I want to be faithful to you until death do us part. She had heard that these 2 epic cards had already appeared in Casson City, but the bandit had no intention of asking around or snatching them by force. After a period of observation, the dragon hunters found that the security of the northern countries was not bad. At least, there were no signs of bandits running amok. The imagined situation of monsters enslaving humans did not happen either. It was hard to imagine that a barren, abandoned, and remote place like the Northern Lands could have such a stable environment. This made them wonder if the ruler of this place was really an evil dragon. From the looks of it, the so-called Black Dragon seemed to be even more concerned about the situation and deployment of his territory than some of the local nobles. Darrow did not use the team's assets. She paid for it herself and went to the counter of the Elegy Tavern. She grabbed 10 gold and slammed it on the table, saying fiercely, I want 100 packs of Elven Forest. Unlike the standard profession packs that were sold at a loss, the price of each series of expansion packs was 1 silver, and they only included 5 cards of the series. Darrow thought that even if she excluded the specific profession cards that rogues could not use, 100 packs of expansion packs should be enough to get the 2 core cards, Elven Queen and Faithful to You. 100 packs. Although the ordinary people in the Northern Lands had not received a systematic education, they were still sensitive to basic numbers. With a little calculation, they knew that 100 packs meant 10 gold coins. Although this amount of money was nothing to a minor noble, it was equivalent to the entire income of a free citizen in the Northern Lands for a month. If the customers here were to take out this amount of money to buy cards for entertainment, they would definitely not be able to do so. This was the first time that such a large purchase of card packs had occurred since the opening of the Calshan's Elegy Tavern. Humans always liked to join in on the fun, especially when there was no danger involved. They quickly stopped what they were doing and temporarily stopped their game. They surrounded Darrow, forming an impenetrable circle behind her. Darrow spent almost all her time in the Elegy Tavern, so the people quickly got to know her. They wanted to see what this generous new friend of theirs would open. Of course, these people were not just eating and having nothing to do. 100 expansion packs meant that Darrow would obtain a total of 500 cards today. Among them, there would be many duplicate cards that rogues could not use. This way, if Darrow was in a good mood, they could take advantage of the situation and complete the exchange at a very low price. The attendant at the counter maintained a professional smile. After accepting the 10 gold coins and making a record on a thick piece of paper, she brought out a pile of Elven Forest expansion packs from the transparent glass cabinet. There were not many people in Kalshan City who bought the Elven Forest expansion packs, so there was enough stock here. During this process, Darrow kept a close eye on the attendant's movements, afraid that she would pull some strings and give the expansion packs to her after being picky. After receiving the card pack and carefully checking the serial numbers on it, Darrow nodded lightly in confirmation. There was no problem. It was a card pack with serial numbers. From the perspective of a legendary dragon hunter, the anti-counterfeiting work of the Elegy card was done quite well. Not only were there complicated anti-counterfeiting engravings on each card, but there was also a unique serial number on the seal of the expansion pack, which matched the small line of words at the bottom of the card. Of course, this did not mean that the Elegy card could not be forged. For them, it was not impossible to fake it, but it would be very troublesome. It would require spellcasters at the level of Great Mage to work together to decipher the anti-counterfeiting engravings. At the same time, they would have to find a way to obtain the sealing technology. At this time, Darrow was not interested in thinking about this. After confirming that everything was correct, she rubbed her palms and got ready to open the packs. As a legendary thief, at this moment, Messiah Darrow was actually a little excited. This was normal. Compared to the Hearthstone of Caesar's previous life, the Elegy card had been greatly trimmed and optimized, but the core gameplay had not changed. While there was a high requirement for technical thinking, a large part of winning or losing was determined by luck. Whether it was during a tense match, the next card that was drawn, or the state of mind when opening the expansion pack to obtain a new card, they were all replicated in Iradia's original way. The thrill of the unknown that appeared at any moment was shockingly attractive. Other than going out on adventures, there was nothing else that could replace the Elegy card. The lack of competition in the market meant that it could dominate the market. This was where Caesar's confidence in the Elegy card's popularity lay. Iradia, who had not experienced the baptism of games and entertainment, were easily addicted to the Elegy card. Darrow was one of them, but she did not realize it. Chapter 257. Normal, normal, rare, normal, normal. This was already the 60th pack of cards that Messiah Darrow had opened. The continuous production of normal cards made her a little impatient. Darrow stroked the unique leaves on the back of the Elven Forest expansion card, pulled out the rare cards that could be used, and put them into his deck. Darrow opened the packs at the counter, so other than a handful of cards in his hand, the cards that he could not use were already in a messy pile in front of him. 10 minutes had passed very quickly for her, but it was very worrying for the surrounding customers. By this time, most of the onlookers had already left. Even Darrow himself was starting to feel a little annoyed after the repeated disappointments. Normal, epic, normal, rare, normal. Darrow yawned and swept a pile of new cards into his trash pile. He skillfully opened the next expansion pack, but his swift movements suddenly paused. Wait, epic? Among the Elegy cards that were currently on sale, only the Blackwing King was a legendary quality card. The rest of the expansion pack core cards were all epic cards. In fact, even epic cards were very rare. Adding up all the new cards that were opened in Kalshan City every day, there might not even be more than 2 epic cards in the world. It was said that the guy who had obtained the Blackwing King, the current record holder of Kalshan's highest winning streak, had already deposited the card deck in the Elegy Tavern and applied for protection from Blackshirt. Darrow's spirits were lifted. He immediately turned around and took back the card with the purple emblem in the center of the front. Suppressing his excitement and joy, he placed it in front of him. This was the charm of the Elegy card. You would never know what your next card would be, and whether or not an epic or legendary card would appear in the next expansion pack. It was not just for games and entertainment. It was said that such transactions had gradually begun to appear. Even if the Elegy card had not completely taken over the mainstream, the Epic card's transaction price was still quite expensive, and the Blackwing King card did not need to be mentioned. Darrow gently stroked the picture and words on the Epic card. Elven Queen Garcia, Whisperwind. Strength, 3, HP, 1. Combo. In this round, every time another card is used before this card, you will gain Strength +1 and HP +2. Fight for a better tomorrow. It was finally here. Messiah Darrow took a deep breath. She had seen this card on the wallpaper of the Elegy Tavern before. It was the Elven Queen. This was probably the most suitable card for thieves at this stage of the game. My deck is stronger now, Darrow said to himself as he glanced at the envious craftsman Barton. A sense of pride and superiority welled up in his heart. This time I must pin this damn dog priest to the ground and beat him. Unfortunately, the other core card of the Elven Forest, Undying, did not appear in these 100 expansion packs. However, Darrow did not care. If 100 packs were not enough, she could always get another 100 packs. But before that, she wanted to see how good the effect of Elven Queen was. Darrow quickly unpacked the rest of the expansion packs and spent some time adjusting his deck. He impatiently sat down with his previous opponent and prepared to take revenge and wipe away his humiliation. Unfortunately, she was quite unlucky in this round. The core card, Elven Queen, came too late. As a result, she was hit by the priest's mind control, which caused Darrow to lose another round. She was unwilling to give up. She pulled Barton and prepared to go again. But at this time, someone gently touched her shoulder and called out, "Messiah." Darrow knew who it was. She turned her head and saw her boss standing behind her. His expression was not very good. "What are you doing?" "BYFF, Darrow said. They had agreed to only call each other by name in the north. The thief opened his mouth to say a word, but then choked. She awkwardly looked at the 4 cards in her hand. Then, she glanced at the clean table and the deck that was already in place. She did not know why, but she suddenly said, "It's just starting. Do you want to play?" After saying this, she saw BYFF's expression turn even uglier. BYFF's lips trembled. He saw the freedman opposite him looking at him strangely. After a while, he gritted his teeth and spat out a word, "Play." Darrow quickly stood up and gave her boss a seat. She also kindly reminded him, "Be careful. These priests are very dirty." BYFF's face was ashen. If not for the fear of exposing their relationship, he really wanted to beat this damned idiot up. However, just as BYFF's but touched the chair and was about to pretend to play a round and then leave with the woman, Darrow's nose suddenly sniffed. Her expression suddenly changed. Her relaxed and leisurely demeanor instantly disappeared. She clenched her teeth and frowned. Her identity immediately changed from a drunkard addicted to games to an extremely dangerous legendary thief. Darrow quickly turned around and glared at the door of the Elegy Tavern. At the same time, she softly said, "BYFF." At the door, black-shirt men in pitch-black armor and equipped with swords and weapons were approaching. These Black Dragon's lackeys pushed the door open first. Then, they used their hands to hold the door frame and prevent the glass door from closing. They let a few muscular flying apes in. Had we been exposed? Did someone leak information? These monsters were obviously the Black Dragon's subordinates. They had never appeared in Kalshan before. Darrow instinctively thought that they were coming for her. The legendary thief's back shrunk slightly. She put her right hand behind her back and placed it on the leather waist pouch that contained the poisoned dagger. "Don't be hasty," BYFF said softly. He only glanced in that direction and did not look again. At the same time, he pulled the thief and forced her to sit on the black wooden chair. "Don't look. Your hostility is too strong. They don't have weapons." The point was that they did not have weapons. The main business of the dragon hunters was dragons, but their targets were not just dragons. BYFF also had a comprehensive understanding of the other species in Iradia. The flying apes were descendants of the ancient Orc Empire. Their intelligence was not lower than that of humans. They were keen and proficient in using weapons such as machetes and javelins, which greatly increased their combat ability. However, the 4 flying apes that came in only held a small box in their hands. They did not carry any weapons. Darrow nodded but still said softly, "The things in their hands have magic waves, but the level is very low." The thief's perception was one of the best among professionals, so when she really observed, she would be able to capture more details than BYFF. Although the leader judged that there was not much of a problem, the necessary precautions could not be relaxed. At this moment, the other customers in the Elegy Tavern also noticed these winged chimpanzees. They could not help but stop what they were doing. Their faces were filled with fear as they shrank back. To be honest, after 2 years of suppression, the Blackwing clan's reputation was actually better than the Blackshirt armies. However, they were still feared and resisted by people. After all, the Black Dragon and Caesar were invaders, conquerors, and also tyrants. This was something that could not be changed in a short period of time. The Elegy Tavern, which had been lively and cheerful, suddenly quieted down. Everyone's eyes were focused on the strange creatures that had just entered. They were slightly uneasy and wanted to see what these fellows from the Blackwing clan were going to do. Thud, thud, thud. The black wooden floor was stepped on. The flying ape leader walked to the center of the tavern with heavy footsteps. It bared its sharp teeth and looked around with its obsidian eyes, sweeping across everyone's faces. It said, "Who is the strongest here? Step forward. I want to challenge him." As it spoke, it raised the box in its hand and flipped it open, revealing the picture on the back of the elegy card. Chapter 258. The customers of the Elegy Tavern looked at each other, unable to react for a while. Even BYFF, a legendary dragon hunter with an extremely stable mentality, couldn't help but be stunned. What did it say? These monsters of Blackwing's lair, the lackeys of Emperor Black Dragon, were actually here just to play cards? The Elegy Tavern was silent. It seems that I've come to the wrong place. There are no humans worth challenging in Kalshan. The black-haired gorilla with wings revealed an ugly smile, full of mockery. It was the most superficial method of provocation, but it was very effective. As soon as it finished speaking, people began to whisper among themselves, and their gazes began to shift in a certain direction. In fact, among the customers of the Elegy Tavern, the class of players had begun to gradually become prominent. Whether it was the strength of the deck or the excellence of the skills, they could all be used as the standard to judge the class of players, allowing people to distinguish between them. The strongest person in Kalshan City was, of course, the one who owned the King of Blackwing and had created a 10-game winning streak. However, that person was very mysterious. Other than opening games and playing cards, he rarely really interacted with people and chatted with them. People guessed that he seemed to be a noble lord, not on the same level as ordinary citizens like them. That person didn't come today. Other than that person, the second-ranked player was a priest, Mr. Barton. Everyone's gazes gradually focused on this craftsman. No one spoke, waiting for him to make his choice. Barton was among the first batch of players to play the Elegy card in Kalshan. He was also one of the players who spent the longest time in the Elegy Tavern. Almost every regular customer knew this craftsman who served the Castellan of Kalshan. And every time Barton finished his work and stepped through the door of the Elegy Tavern, he would always be teased by them. "Barton, you must have stolen someone's card again." Then Barton would widen his eyes. "Why are you making up nonsense out of thin air?" "What nonsense? We saw with our own eyes yesterday that you only won the game with great difficulty because you stole a card." From the fact that he had spent the night pondering over his class choice, it could be seen that Barton was famous for being serious. So at this time, his face would turn red, and the veins on his forehead would bulge. He would argue, "Stealing a card. How can stealing a card be considered stealing? Can the priest class be considered stealing?" Next, the adorable blacksmith would begin to spread the knowledge of the priest class to the players, saying things like thought steal and mind control that the new players would not understand. Soon after, everyone began to roar with laughter, and the tavern was filled with a cheerful atmosphere. under the terrifying control of the evil Dragon Emperor. This was the only place where one could temporarily escape from reality and enjoy pure happiness. This was also the reason why the Northlanders held the Elegy brand in such high esteem. Although Barton always won and always made his opponents grit their teeth in anger, everyone still loved him. This craftsman, with a beer belly and a serious personality, would not only bring joy to everyone, he was also happy to teach the newcomers how to get started. This included Darrow. Hence, when a legendary bandit noticed that the flying ape chieftain's gaze followed the crowd and landed on Barton, he once again reached for his dagger. When he realized that everyone was looking at him, Barton gulped. After a while, he asked softly, What if I lose? What will happen?" Although he had dealt with Blackshirt before, he was still an ordinary person. It was inevitable for him to be cautious and cowardly when he saw someone of a different race. "Lose!" The flying ape stared at him and sneered, revealing its ferocious fangs. "If you lose, I can choose one card from your deck. It will belong to me from now on. On the other hand, if you win, you can also take mine. How about it? Do you dare?" When he heard the flying ape's request, Barton was relieved. What he was most afraid of was not losing his cards, but paying a price that was difficult to give up. He could accept this condition. In addition, he had a rare record of being defeated in Casson City, which gave him enough confidence. Okay, Barton agreed. Hearing this, the flying ape chieftain strode over. It glanced at BYFF, who had given up his seat and sat down without paying any attention. The black wooden chair made a soft creaking sound. These flying apes did not look fat, just strong, but their actual weight was several times that of a normal adult man. The flying ape placed its right arm, which was thicker than a human's thigh, on the table and placed its class badge on the table. The class it used was warrior, but it was not a human warrior wearing exquisite heavy armor. Instead, it was a strong orc with a bare upper body and a single-edged greatsword. Barton carefully placed the white-robed cleric's badge on the table, which was inscribed with a staff raised. At this time, the others were no longer interested in playing the game. They all gathered around and stood behind Barton, cheering him on, giving their friends encouragement and support. In comparison, the flying ape chieftain only had 3 subordinates behind it, and all of them were silent, quietly waiting for orders. It seemed a little shabby. However, the flying ape chieftain did not care. It raised its rough finger and gently tapped on its class badge. The sound of a harp that no one had ever heard before rang out softly, pleasing to the ear. At this time, it placed its elegy deck on the table. "Let's begin." Thus, the game officially began. This was the first friendly contact between the humans of the Northern Lands and the other races. It marked the beginning of the integration of the Northern Lands and the establishment of the Blackwing Empire. However, when the flying ape chieftain played the first card, everyone's eyes widened. It was different. This guy's elegy card was different from everyone else's. The material of the elegy deck in the flying ape chieftain's hand was obviously different from theirs. It had a good texture and looked more advanced. The image on it was also very clear, and at the same time, it seemed to be flowing with brilliance. No matter how much it was magnified, it could still be seen clearly. Most importantly, this fellow's elegy deck could actually speak. For example, now that the flying ape chieftain had dealt 2 damage and 1 damage, as well as the Blackwing battle lizardman with the ability to move in stealth, it roared, "I smell blood." That voice was as if there was really a battle lizardman roaring in one's ear, causing everyone to tremble in fear. Even the dragon hunter could not help but be startled. Then, the dragon hunter noticed that the voice was coming from the mass energy crystal embedded in the card. Please don't panic. This is the elegy deck that we are about to release. After this game, the elegy deck will be sold throughout the Northern Lands. At this time, the waiter of the tavern who was invited to be the judge smiled and comforted everyone. He then added, "At that time, a new expansion pack, the Undead Domain, will be released at the same time. However, due to the production process, the Undead Domain expansion pack can only be obtained from the collector's edition. The standard version is temporarily unavailable and will only be released after a month." Please understand. Chapter 259. The Tahala Desert was a paradise for bandits and also a hunting ground for monsters. Many bandits and monsters lived in the desert, making it one of the most terrifying forbidden areas in the north. The Tahala Desert's reputation was no less than that of Blackwing's Nest, and it had a longer history. It was located in the south of the northern countries, and the main road to the central city of Iradia passed through the desert. The bandits and monsters were able to guard the main road from the north to the central region of the continent. Their green eyes stared at every outsider, eager to share every drop of blood. However, the ones who really controlled this place were the evil gods hiding in the shadows. Most of the bandits and monsters were believers of the evil gods, and Malor was one of them. In addition, there were no true dragons in the Tahala Desert, but there were countless fierce and violent blue dragons. They were all the claws of the black blood beasts, so the god of hunting's words were quite important here, and he could command almost the entire Tahala Desert. Although the god of the hunt was chaotic, he was not stupid to the core. Around Blackwing's Nest, the primitive tribes of the West Sea Islands, as well as the dragons, bandits, and magical creatures of the Tahala Desert, were all forces that Malor could control. These two forces formed a small, invisible encirclement around the northern countries. This was the reason why the god of hunting had made a request to the Black Dragon Lord. He urgently needed to enter the northern countries. First, he wanted to plunder Faith. Second, he wanted to unite his forces and lay a good foundation for his future control of the northern region. However, the Black Dragon Caesar rejected him. Malor was indeed afraid of the rumors that the Black Dragon had spread recently. He was worried that there were demigods and false gods that were native to Eladia who wanted to harm him. In fact, the god of the hunt had already begun to regret his words. He should not have said such harsh words before. Now he was in a dilemma. However, even if he did not go down personally, he believed that he still had the means to punish the damn Black Dragon. At this time, the two forces under the control of the god of hunting had gradually begun to stir. The Mala believers in other parts of the Iradia continent arrived at the Tahala Desert one after another to meet up with the natives. On the other side, the primitive people in the West Sea Islands had already finished reorganizing. Malor did not plan to descend personally and continue to hide in his god kingdom. However, he had already prepared apostles and an army to wage war against Blackwing's Nest. He wanted to give the arrogant and rude Black Dragon a heavy blow. However, there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. Ever since he had taken control of the northern lands, Caesar had been paying close attention to the reactions of the outside world. The frequent movements in the Tahala Desert had long been discovered by the Blackwing clan. The northern kingdom's Blackwing court. The hall was filled with a cold and gloomy aura. The ice stones wrapped in crystals were sparkling and swaying. The leaders of the Blackwing clan were all gathered here. Your Majesty, Lich Leon, who was in charge of intelligence and investigation, was the first to speak. According to our understanding, the Tahala Desert only has the believers of the god of hunting. In fact, there are many minions of other evil gods, such as the believers of the god of fear and the god of hatred. In addition, there are also some non-believer bandits. Their strength is not to be underestimated. Moreover, in addition to the Tahala Desert, there are many floating islands in the West Sea with a large number of primitive tribes. In addition, we may encounter all kinds of unexpected situations. If we plan to go to war, we need a sufficient army. We already have a sufficient army. The Boorman Pavel continued Leon's words with a slight rebuttal. Due to its strict nature, it was assigned to be in charge of the Elegy Workshop and the Greenfield base. Now, the entire Greenfield has become a breeding ground for Blackwing's Nest. In recent years, the Gnolls, Battle Lizardmen, and Gray Centaurs have relied on their strong reproductive abilities to quadruple their numbers. In addition, the number of canine demons and flying dragons has also experienced a breakthrough. The Boorman leader took 2 steps forward and suggested to the Black Dragon who was sitting on the throne. In fact, the breeding base can no longer provide for so many troops. Your Majesty, the warrior's thirst for blood. In the war to conquer the northern countries, the most depleted was actually the undead domain. A large number of high undead were annihilated in the Firmrock stronghold and were still unable to recover. Blackwing's Nest, which was the last to attack, did not suffer many losses. Their military forces were almost completely preserved. In fact, even if the fellows hiding in the Tahala Desert did not listen to Mailer's instructions and were preparing to invade the northern countries, the Black Dragon Lord would have taken the initiative to clean up these scum. It was not just the Black Dragon Emperor. If it were any other ruler of the northern lands, the Tahala Desert would be like a malignant tumor. These damn scum had cut off the main road from the northern lands to the core of the continent. Thus, in the northern countries, if a normal small caravan or noble wanted to go out to trade, they would have to cross a very long distance and avoid the Tahala Desert. Even the great nobles and merchants who had great military strength and could hire troops to pass through the Tahala Desert could not guarantee that they would be completely safe. These blood-sucking worms attached to the trade routes greatly increased the cost of trade between the northern lands and the outside world, causing the already barren northern wilderness to be even more unable to flourish. As a dictator with great ambition, Caesar naturally could not tolerate this grain of sand. "If you need it, your majesty," Hogg, who was closest to the black gold throne, spoke up and concluded, "It is not very difficult for us to clean up the Tahala Desert. Even those primitive people hiding in the western islands will not be able to escape the eyes of the Blackwing clan. The flying apes, manticores, and wyverns can cross the sea and drag them out one by one." The biggest difference between the monster clans and humans was that they thirsted for war and blood. Even many races were born for this. Without war, they were nothing. Therefore, when facing the army of the god of hunting, none of the clan leaders under the Black Dragon Emperor thought about how to avoid war. They were all arguing about how to win the war and how to completely tear the enemy into pieces. But the Knoll leader hesitated for a moment, and a moment of hesitation appeared on his face. Then he became determined and said, "Your Majesty, please allow me to remind you that we may need to guard against some possible hidden dangers." "What hidden dangers?" Caesar's huge head slightly leaned forward. "The northern countries and the elven forest. Even if there were human black shirts in the palace who served the Black Dragon Emperor, and even if Queen Luna, who was born in the elven forest, stayed on the Black Dragon's neck," Hogg still said bluntly, "we must guard against possible betrayals. Now, the elven forest and the northern countries are not worthy of your full trust. They may change sides at any time." Chapter 260. Very good. Caesar nodded, giving the Knoll leader a compliment and affirmation. As the second in command of the Blackwing court, Hogg was indeed thoughtful. From the standpoint of Blackwing's Nest, the humans of the northern countries and Taya of the elven forest had a reason to turn against them. But in fact, the possibility of this happening is not high. The Black Dragon looked at him with dark red eyes and explained, "The elven forest and the northern countries have already suffered losses. I don't think they have the courage to raise their blades against us again. If these two countries really dared to drag Blackwing's Nest down, when Caesar took back his hand to deal with them, the consequences would be immeasurable. The rulers of the two sides were not that stupid. Of course, vigilance and precautions are still necessary. Send some of the battle lizardmen to the elven forest and keep an eye on the movements there. The northern countries will be under Blackshirt's control." The Black Dragon, covered with ferocious barbs, stood up from the throne that was integrated with him. He climbed to the front and looked down at the clan leaders. "I called you here not only to discuss how to fight, but also to tell you that the god of hunting is just a minion under the command of one of the evil gods, the Lord of Storm. It is an insignificant thing. What I want to tell you is that Blackwing's Nest should not only be prepared to go to war with Mailer's apostles and believers, but also be prepared to pull in the forces of the other evil gods and the righteous gods." The Black Dragon walked closer. Seeing the worry and confusion on the faces of Ryan, Hogg, and the other core family members, he explained a little more. "In the third era, The other worldlings who could rule over the humans had long gone extinct. Although the kingdoms in the north are small, it is impossible for Blackwing's lair to not attract the attention of others forever. The human rulers of other countries, the gods of justice and evil, and some other unknown things would sooner or later notice this place. When he said this, Caesar thought of the weird and vicious little statue, but he did not mention it. Instead, he continued, "If you want to establish yourself in Iradia, Blackwing's nest will have to be fought." Caesar had carefully analyzed the situation of the continent when he had made the decision to rule over the northern lands. He had already predicted this day. Even without Murat, when the Blackwing Empire was integrated and established, there would be gods such as cows and dogs who would come to harass them. They would also attract the hostility of trading city-states and non-falling empires because of the competition for resources. War was inevitable. As for Blackwing's nest, they had to accept the challenge, and they had to win. It was better to start the war earlier than later. Using a phrase from the great country that Caesar was from, it was called, "If you can open a door with one punch, you can avoid 100 punches." The Black Dragon Lord needed to show Iradia his strength, and so did Blackwing's nest. As long as you were willing. He took out his legendary weapon and placed it on the Elantra carpet in front of him. The bloodthirsty, short axe, which was flowing with magical light, flashed coldly on the soft wool. The Jackalans will always be the guillotine in your hand. The dragon descendant is master. The leader of the flying dragons cried out and fought for it, coming hog's side. The Stone Crow clan is willing to die for you. The Hound Devil is always thirsting for blood, your majesty. The Manticore obeys your command. The other clan leaders also expressed their agreement. They all bared their teeth and knelt in front of the Blackwing Palace. Caesar waited for them to calm down, then said, "But this war can also give us something else. Bear it." The emperor called out a name that the Blackwing clan leaders were not familiar with. Noticing the black dragon's dark red vertical eye, the bard, who was surrounded by a group of powerful mutated race leaders and had a weak sense of presence, trembled. His heart palpitated, and he lowered his head and walked out from the corner behind the palace, kneeling down like the other clan leaders. "Your Majesty," he said with trepidation, "you did a good job before." Caesar first affirmed his work, then ordered, "After you go back, organize your men and carry out propaganda work inside the northern countries. Let everyone know that the god of hunting is about to attack, that it is ready to slaughter the northern countries and completely destroy this place. The official announcement board and the stronghold of the Elegy Tavern are all available for you to use. But listen carefully, I want everyone to know everyone." The black dragon stared at him, showing a cruel and violent side. "If you can't do it, you will die." Caesar wanted to establish the Blackwing Empire, so he had to smooth the relationship between the Blackwing clan and the northern humans as much as possible. War was the best way to transfer internal conflicts and close the gap between the mutated races. But the premise was that Caesar had to secretly change a few concepts. If people knew that the followers of the god of hunting only came to defeat the Blackwing nest and rule the northern countries, the numb people would not have any reaction. Anyway, in the eyes of the people, the Black Dragon Emperor and the Black Blood God were jackals of the same tribe. If they changed rulers, their lives would not become worse. This was the necessity of the propaganda department. Caesar needed Barrett to do a good job of public opinion and not mention the historical relationship between the Blackwing nest and the god of hunting. It was enough to let the people of the north think that the god of hunting came to slaughter the northern countries. Anyway, Murat's reputation had always been terrible, and he had been blamed enough. He probably would not care if he was blamed for another two. Under such subconscious propaganda, there was no need to say it out loud. People would subconsciously think that Blackwing's nest was the protector of the northern countries. Of course, this was not enough. The war gave Caesar enough space to make use of. Of course, he would not only send the Blackwing clan to fight the god of hunting. At the same time, the Black Dragon Emperor would also gather the northern human soldiers to fight together with the Blackwing clan. Under the high pressure of Blackwing's nest, the military strength of the various countries in the northern lands was already extremely weak. They were unable to play much of a role in the war. However, this stance had to be displayed. Caesar wanted to send a message to the people. He wanted to let them know that the Blackwing clan was also a member of his side. There was no need for them to resist. At crucial moments, they would also be able to fight alongside him. It was also worth mentioning that the northern army that the Black Dragon Lord wanted to conscript did not include the Black Shirt Army. When the Black Shirt Army was established and recruited, Caesar defined their function as not an army used for fighting. It was more appropriate to call them the Imperial Garrison Force. The Black Shirt Army was actually the maintainer of order in the northern countries. If they all rushed to the front line, the gradually stabilizing situation in the northern countries would be thrown into chaos again. Caesar wanted to use this as a pretext to mobilize the armies of the rulers and great nobles of the various countries. If those guys did not do their best, the Black Dragon would have the opportunity and excuse to deal with them. Speaking of which, this war was really just right. If there was a chance, the Black Dragon Lord would have to thank Murat. Chapter 261. He was going to lose. Barton had played almost 200 matches since the release of the Elegy card and the start of the match. There were many defeats, but this was the first time he felt such immense pressure. The shadow of defeat was getting closer and closer, and he was slowly being pulled into its embrace. The gentle and soothing music was still playing, but the match was in a temporary stalemate. He had always thought that the warrior class was the weakest of the 5 major elegy classes. In Barton's understanding, he only needed to block the first few rounds of the warrior class violent attacks to gradually gain the upper hand. He had always done this, and it had been tried and tested. However, the Flying Ape leader had completely changed his mindset. In this match, things did not develop as expected. Towards the end, the Flying Ape did not show any signs of fatigue. Instead, it became stronger as the battle went on. In the Elegy card, every class had a talent skill. The skill of the warrior class was fully armed. Every round, it would consume 2 energy and provide 2 points of armor. Up until now, according to the referee's calculations, the Flying Ape leader's armor had exceeded 20 points after the support of the talent skill, spell card, and followers' abilities. Endless armor, endless followers. The situation was getting harder and harder to control. The evil dragon mother is watching you. As the Flying Ape leader grinned and played a new card, the Horse True Dragon's whisper made Barton's forehead break out in even more cold sweat. Dark Double Star Black Shia Targaryen. 6 cost, 4 attack, 5 HP. Death Whisper. Summon a level 45 Garen Targaryen. Seeing the appearance of this epic card, a sigh came from behind Barton. This was too difficult. The Blackwing's Nest expansion pack was currently the most powerful expansion pack. However, although the cards contained within were powerful, the chances of obtaining them were very low and very rare. Just like this Dark Twin Stars, people had only seen it on the wallpaper of taverns. However, this Flying Ape had all of them. Other than that, it also had the Knoll Hog and Great Wizard save from before. Barton was forced to play a Chimera Magusher with a taunting ability to temporarily relieve the pressure. In fact, he still had a mind control card in his hand, but he was still hesitant and did not dare to use it. This was his first match with the Flying Ape. He was not sure if the other party had the legendary card Blackwing King. After knowing that the other party was a warrior class that used the Blackwing's Nest expansion pack, Barton immediately prepared to leave the mind control to Blackwing King. In the end, Barton still decided to use his followers to forcefully resist the Dark Twin Stars and use other spells to kill them. After that, he and the Flying Ape leader to enter the final battle. In the end, almost without any suspense, as the Orc Warrior's emblem said, "I will crush you." His HP was reduced to 0, and he was completely defeated by the Flying Ape. However, the King of Black Wings that he had been worried about didn't appear until the final chapter. As for Barton's mind control, which had always been successful, he naturally didn't have a chance to use it. "I've lost." Barton put down the cards in his hand and admitted defeat. As the match came to an end, the crowd that had been silent finally began to stir. Waves of discussion sounded one after another, clearly reaching Barton's ears. Mr. Barton lost on purpose, right? He let the guy from Blackwing's nest win. He even held mind control in his hand and didn't use it. I think so too. If I had used it when the opponent played the Dark Twin Stars, the effect would have been just right. Maybe I would have had a chance to turn the tables. Even if he missed the Dark Twin Stars, the Hound Demonero card could have been used with mind control. In the end, he let it go again. Is Mr. Barton in a bad state today? Perhaps my judgment was wrong. The continuous discussion made a bitter smile appear on Barton's face. Barton's income was not high, and he was very careful with his spending. So this guy had only bought one Northern Rhine expansion pack and one Elven Forest expansion pack. Unfortunately, he did not find any surprises. Barton's deck did not have any good cards. However, he still cherished them very much. Therefore, when he was about to fulfill his promise of failure and let the other party pick a card, this little craftsman was rather reluctant. However, after a brief hesitation, he pushed the deck of cards to the middle of the table and said, "You choose." Very good. The Flying Ape leader, who had been silent for the entire match, finally spoke. It opened its thick lips and forced a smile on its ugly ape face covered in black hair. It put down its unique elegy card and spread the cards on the table. Among the three cards, the first and only legendary card of the elegy card, the Blackwing King, which Barton had always been worried about and on guard against, was lying quietly on the table. Its high-spirited posture flowed with a lustrous brilliance. Everyone was enlightened. So the reason why Mind Control didn't make a move was because it was waiting for it. In the rules and design of the elegy card, although the strength of the cards was different, it was not impossible to resist even a legendary card. In the cleric class, Mind Control was the best way to counterbalance the Blackwing King. Mr. Barton and the Flying Ape engaged in a hidden game. He guessed that it had the Blackwing King, and it also guessed that he had Mind Control. Therefore, until the end of the match, these two cards did not appear on the field. Of course, this was only the simplest and most superficial game. However, in the early stages of the elegy card's appearance, this match could already be called a high-level battle. It could bring a lot of inspiration to the players. In addition, many smart and intelligent fellows, including Barton, noticed that the combination of warrior cards used by the Flying Ape was very ingenious. It seemed to be traceable. This point also caused them to ponder deeply. However, a failure was a failure. It was time to pay the price. The Flying Ape did not hold back. Under Barton's pained gaze, it directly picked up the Mind Control card that belonged to the cleric class and pulled it away. Not bad. The Flying Ape used its rough thumb and index finger to pinch the card. It sized it up playfully and said, "Your idea is quite smart. Unfortunately, your card deck is a mess. The combination is surprisingly bad." The Flying Ape's smug and mocking words immediately drew angry glares from the crowd. After the question of why Barton did not use Mind Control was answered, in the eyes of the crowd, the reason he lost was all because of the strength of his card deck. The Flying Ape's card deck was on a completely different level from theirs. It was not surprising that it won this match. A win was a win. If one was willing to bet, one had to admit defeat. However, the Flying Ape's sarcastic remarks were enough to infuriate the crowd. However, due to the Flying Ape's identity as a member of the Blackwing clan, the crowd did not dare to do anything. They did not even dare to speak ill of it. They could only swallow their anger, and their hatred for the Blackwing clan deepened. However, at this moment, the Flying Ape leader suddenly changed the topic. It stood up abruptly. As the first human to dare accept the challenge in Casson City, your courage is commendable. Brave warrior. It snapped its fingers and gestured for its subordinates to come forward. It took out a collector's edition Mind Control card from another box and handed it to Barton. "This is a gift from the Flying Ape. Take it and protect it well. Next time, you won't be so lucky." Finally, after saying, "See you tomorrow," the Flying Apes did not say another word and left the elegy tavern one after another. Chapter 262. Luna was unhappy, very unhappy. The elegy card that the little girl was very concerned about had been released for some time, and it had received a good response from the northern kingdoms. Under such circumstances, she would often quietly leave the Blackwing Kingdom after informing Caesar and go to a few elegy taverns in Rhine. She would use the transformation necklace to disguise herself as a human and play against other players. However, only now did Luna suddenly realize that in the elegy card expansion pack, the Elven Forest had Emperor Whisperwind and Chimera Magusher. The Blackwing Lair had Black Shia, Hog, and Nero, and the Northern Rhine had Roy and Grand Duke Lionheart. But she was not. She was not. Luna knew that she did not have the ability to fight. However, even if she turned into a small elf with 0 attack and 1 health in the elegy card, she would still be very happy. However, after looking through the entire elegy card, the Elven Forest, and the Blackwing Lair expansion pack, she did not see her own projection. This meant that the designer of the elegy card did not care about her at all. Luna puffed up her cheeks and rubbed the flower petals in her hands twice. Then, she threw them on the ground and threw herself on them. She was so angry that she shook her slender, white legs vigorously. In fact, the little girl would not really throw a tantrum just because of this. If Caesar really forgot, she could understand. At most, she would find a time to let the black dragon release it again. However, what made Luna even angrier was that yesterday was the day when the goddess of love, Fea, blessed Iradia in the First Era. Since then, it had evolved into an annual festival of love. This was a festival shared by many intelligent races in Iradia. If it was an elven forest, people would hold a banquet on this day, playing harps around the moon lake, singing songs, sighing at the starry sky, and praising sincere love. Her parents, Tierope and Balanwai, had promised to hold hands and spend the rest of their lives together on this day. However, yesterday had already ended. Until now, the big black dragon had not said anything. He had spent an entire day with the leaders of the Blackwing clan. No matter what, he should at least tell her. She felt wronged, pitiful, and helpless. The more she thought about it, the more uncomfortable Luna felt. She covered her head with the petals and muttered, "Stupid dragon, stinky dragon, stupid dragon, stupid dragon." Oomph! Caesar, who had passed down the orders one by one, temporarily threw Mailer's problem to the back of his mind. After sending away the clan leaders, the black dragon snorted and slowly walked out of the Blackwing Palace. He crawled into the surrounding garden and breathed in the fresh air. He began another round of research on spirit energy. Caesar wasn't sure how strong Mailer would be if he used the Apostles' Descent. Therefore, during this period of time, the Black Dragon was trying his best to increase his strength in order to face the possible war. The trophy could not be obtained by the Black Dragon, but psionic energy could be obtained through hard work and training. It could give Caesar very direct feedback. To be honest, he liked this feeling. The strength of psionic energy depended on the strengthening of one's willpower and the improvement of one's spiritual control. Under the accumulation of psionic meditation, one's spirit and willpower would be continuously strengthened. Meanwhile, in the next stage, one's body would also gradually be affected by this aspect. Following that, a special ability would appear. The appearance of a special ability signified that a psionicist was beginning to grasp powerful combat strength. Caesar guessed that the manifestation of this thing should be something like a law. It belonged to a type of idealistic power that did not rely on magic or elemental energy. In that case, if he really became a powerful psionic black dragon, it seemed like it was not impossible for him to not rely on Black Dream and create his own law. Blood vessels, spirit, and strength all contracted, embracing each other in a balanced manner. Then, they quickly burst forth and rushed out. Sensing and controlling one's body on a microscopic level was the most direct characteristic of opening the path of psionic energy. Caesar had long been able to do this through the autonomous control unit, but this time, it was his first time trying to control his body like this, using a completely different method. Willpower was a type of power. As long as it was strong enough and understood how to use it, It could project reality and affect reality. This was the essence of psionic energy. Unknowingly, half a day passed just like that. The sun in the northern lands was shining brightly. Caesar opened his vertical eye and exhaled two thin streams of white air from his nostrils. He shook his tail and stretched his body, ending today's mission. Not putting all his eggs in one basket and relying on his own strength to attempt to walk a different path was not that simple. It was far from the feeling of leaps and bounds that he felt when he relied on Black Dream's reward. However, after persevering for a period of time, Caesar had indeed gained some feedback and benefits. Other things aside, at least this guy's perception had improved to a certain extent. At the same time, it was even more obvious that the Black Dragon Lord could now attempt to release psionic energy and forcefully influence some external objects, such as playing the Elegy card game. With a calm mind, the Black Dragon's huge body undulated in the sea of flowers as he slowly crawled along the path. After a while, he finally found the little one who stayed at the place where he often slept. "Luna," the Black Dragon Lord called out softly as he gradually approached and lowered his head beside her. Usually at this time, Luna would fly over with a buzzing sound and hug him with her face pressed against his neck. However, this time she did not. Luna glanced at the Black Dragon, then turned around with her back facing him. After that, she snorted heavily to express her dissatisfaction. The little one was throwing a tantrum, and it was so obvious that Caesar could tell a glance. He thought for a moment, and it seemed that there was nothing that made the little one unhappy recently. Could it be that she lost in a game of cards? The Black Dragon laid his neck flat and placed his huge head beside Luna. His tail drooped behind him as he looked at her and asked, "What's wrong?" Luna paused for a moment, then slanted her body imperceptibly and stole a glance at Caesar. After that, she shifted her butt again and turned around, once again facing the Black Dragon with her back. I don't want to talk to you." "Oh, angry at me? You want to talk to me?" Caesar would not be polite with her. He stuck out his tongue and licked her. At first, the little one was still unmoved, but after a while, she could not hold on anymore. She was teased all over the place, and because of the itch, she let out a burst of crisp laughter. Okay, don't." The little one struggled and hurriedly blocked the Black Dragon's tongue, preventing him from continuing to use his poisonous tongue. If this continued, she would almost be rolled up. Then, under Caesar's interrogation, Luna told him everything that had made her angry before. "So you're thinking about the Elegy card?" Caesar shook his head and explained with a smile, "Listen to me, Luna. No matter how strong your combat ability is, before I have enough strength to protect you, I will not add you in. That will put you in danger, and I promised you." The Black Dragon looked at her sincerely. I know." Luna nodded. The forest fairies were not an unreasonable race, so this matter was over. Then what about the Festival of Love? This time, Caesar could not withdraw. Missing the Festival of Love was really the Black Dragon's fault. However, this guy really did not remember Iradia's festival, so Caesar could only use this as an excuse to emphasize the fact that he was a visitor from another world. "Then I'll let it go this time, but you have to remember it in the future." The little one was very dissatisfied with this explanation, but still muttered that she forgave the Black Dragon. She climbed onto the Black Dragon's back and hugged the scales that Caesar had adjusted for her. After all, she did not really take it to heart. It was understandable that she would occasionally throw a tantrum. Chapter 263. Ron Lackland returned to his bedroom upset and waved away the servants who stood silently. He didn't even have time to take off his clothes before he lay down on the bed filled with black feathers. He felt that he had no strength to move at all. It was late at night, and only the footsteps of the palace guards patrolling outside could be heard occasionally. The Lackland Palace was quiet, but Ron couldn't fall asleep. His mind couldn't help but wander. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the Blackwing Palace released the news that the god of hunting was about to attack the north. Under the instructions of Emperor Black Dragon, the propaganda department of the Blackwing Palace spared no effort to spread the news, and the topic had begun to ferment quickly. All over the north, the world was being unveiled. Some people were flustered, some were frightened, and some were apathetic and indifferent. However, compared to the civilians, the rulers of the various countries were not so easy to fool. These rulers from the ancient families were well-versed in politics. They knew that the news released by the Blackwing Palace was probably mixed with water, and most of it was false. But this had nothing to do with them. These rulers were more concerned about what they could get from this storm. According to the situation that Ron had learned so far, the ruler of the Duchy of Nolan had the most intense reaction. The army of Nolan was desperately blocking the news and spreading rumors that the Black Dragon was a liar and that it was the Black Dragon who caused the disaster, intensifying the hostility of the people towards the Blackwing nest. After that, Grand Duke Nolan seized the opportunity to wantonly promote the Master of Ceremonies, who was also a god with weak divine power. Grand Duke Nolan claimed that as long as they sincerely prayed to His Majesty Nelan and abandoned everything about the evil dragon, the Master of Ceremonies would protect the people of Nolan and protect them from the invasion of the god hunting. At the same time, they could also escape from the clutches of the Black Dragon. It could be seen that this was not a temporary choice, but a premeditated game of chess. In the Battle of the Rocks, Nolan was the country that suffered the least loss. At the same time, because of the distance and the fact that the ruler had been suppressing the Blackshirts, there were very few supporters of the Blackwings in the Duchy of Nolan. It had been waiting for such an opportunity. On this day, the Duchy of Nolan displayed extremely high efficiency and execution. In just one day, all the Blackshirts and supporters who served the Blackwing Palace were arrested and put under house arrest. At the same time, the border was sealed in an attempt to take the opportunity to escape the control of the Blackwing Palace. In Grand Duke Nolan's opinion, with the enemy before them, it was unlikely that Blackwing's nest would resort to any radical methods. He had already guessed Black Dragon Caesar's true intentions in this propaganda. He wanted to use this to ease and resolve the internal conflict. As long as Nolan, he would have the power to resist the Master of Blackwing. After Nolan to be independent, 2-2. There wasn't even the slightest delay. On the second day of Norrin's chaos, a sea of gray centaurs and heavy-armored beastmen passed through Lacrin. The roaring dragons and manticores covered the sky. With the enemy in front of them, the Black Dragon Lord needed a stable rear. Grand Duke Nolan could not wait to jump out and use him as an example to intimidate the other countries. After this, even Lowen Lachlan, the current king of the Lachlan Kingdom, could no longer receive news from the Duchy of Nolan. When he heard this, Lowen's face turned completely pale. Actually, he had similar plans. However, the Blackwing Palace's thunderous actions were like a bucket of cold water poured over his head, reminding him that although the Black Emperor had not made any drastic moves recently and was using gentle methods to gradually integrate the countries in the northern lands, he was still a Black Dragon Lord. In reality, he was still an evil dragon who killed without batting an eyelid. Very quickly, after completely sealing off and prohibiting the internal news of the Duchy of Nolan from spreading out, Caesar issued a full-scale war mobilization, calling on the people in the northern lands to work together to fight against the brutal black blood beasts. This situation was exactly the same as when they had mobilized the people to fight against the invasion of the Blackwing nest. However, the Blackwing Palace did it better, more comprehensively, and more instigating. Rulers like Lowen were, of course, disdainful of this. They did not think that the Black Dragon had the ability and possibility to defeat Malor. After all, he was a god. Although they had learned a lesson from the Duchy of Nolan, these guys also had their own thoughts. They would rather find a way out for themselves and rely on other gods than follow this group of monsters to fight to the death. Therefore, when the Blackwing Palace's order to recruit troops arrived, the rulers of the various countries were actually quite perfunctory. On the other side, the Blackwing nobles who relied on the Black Dragon to promote showed a completely different attitude. They were very concerned about this and were very enthusiastic about gathering troops in their fiefdoms, preparing to send them to the Blackwing Palace. And at the bottom, Among many civilians, there were also many people who regarded the Blackwing Palace as a life-saving straw. The emergence of this idea did not appear in a short period of time, but was formed subtly. First of all, the Northlanders, except for Rhine, did not have much hope or love for their own country. No one knew better than these people about the greed, fierceness, and ugliness of the rulers. And in the face of the Blackwing nest, they became extremely weak, which was enough to make the people completely disappointed in those nobles. In contrast, after the Blackwing Palace ruled the Northland, the people found that they did not live in the bloody terror as they had imagined. As long as they strictly followed the law and did not violate the prohibitions, their lives did not seem to have changed much. They even had a better life than before. It should be known that before Caesar took out the economic and policy reforms, the overall economic situation of the Northland countries was in a downward trend. The reason why the people had this illusion was that although now all walks of life and every business activity had to pay taxes to the palace. But other than that, the Blackwing Palace did not use other excuses to enslave the people. This was difficult for other noble rulers to do. In their eyes, the people were livestock waiting to be slaughtered, and the people at the bottom were to be enslaved. Honor was illusory and vague, but their days were really in front of them. Most of the ordinary people would not think about restoring the glory of the past. As long as they could satisfy the needs of their lives and live better than before, they would be satisfied. After the Blackwing nest ruled the Northland, stability and safety were real. No one would have thought that those monsters could do better than the nobles, but this was indeed an unimaginable fact. At least until now, the clans in black shirts had never forced their way into the residences of the people and abducted slaves for no reason. This was not unusual in the previous Northland countries. The poor people walking on the streets would immediately be abducted as slaves for various reasons. Just this point alone allowed the Blackwing nest to gain enough support. Even Caesar himself did not expect that the Blackwing Palace's campaign in the Northland would have such an unexpected effect. Rhine Kalshan. Darrow returned to her residence and quietly pushed open the door of the guest house. BYFF and the other dragon hunters living in the same room turned to look at her. Have you heard? The god of hunting is about to attack the Northland countries and is going to war with the Black Dragon. Darrow said with a solemn expression. Is that so? Looking at her, someone couldn't help but laugh. Little girl, we also know that the Orc Empire has been destroyed. Our thieves are really well informed. There were not many adventurers who did not have a fiery temper. How could they stand such ridicule? Moreover, she was a rather young and arrogant legend. So Messiah Darrow's eyebrows immediately rose. She stared at the man, revealing her teeth that were dyed dark red from chewing tobacco leaves. Oh, you're quite scary. However, the other party was also a dragon hunter who had once killed a real dragon. He was a powerful legend warrior, so he was not afraid at all. The man changed his posture and put his arms on his knees. He looked at her fiercely. Okay. As the leader, BYFF frowned and interrupted the confrontation of his companions. He said, Messiah, you came too late. You stayed in that tavern all day long. Logically speaking, you should have known the news before us. BYFF was the organizer of this team. He was experienced and very dignified. Darrow did not talk back and did not say anything. Originally, as a thief, she should be in charge of the intelligence matters in the team. However, Darrow had recently been obsessed with the elegy card, which was a dereliction of duty. Dragon slaying was not a joke or a story. To make such a mistake during the execution of a mission was definitely a serious problem. It was no wonder that the other dragon hunters would mock her. But the elegy card is really interesting, she said quietly in her heart. Her eyes could not help but glance outside, drifting erratically. Darrow spent a few seconds to suppress the rising playfulness in her heart and talk about business. BYFF, what should we do now? Go to the Castellan of Casson City and respond to the mobilization to join the army of Blackwing's nest. Participate in this war against the god of hunting. BYFF did not hide anything and said concisely, on the battlefield, we will act. Chapter 264. Ren Shamir carefully observed the interior of the Tahala Desert with his adept's eyes through the misty, gray fog. Caesar certainly wouldn't wait for the god of hunting to invade his territory. Passively defending was not the style of Blackwing's nest. He couldn't accept the loss of a war in the north. So the Black Dragon sent the Demolic to be in charge of scouting. He planned to directly rush into Mailer's territory and clean up the entire Tahala Desert. Ryan tried to identify the distribution of the forces of the god of hunting through the sorcerer's eye. The other party was obviously prepared. The gray fog was a spellcaster's means to hide from spying. However, as a Demolic who had experienced life and death several times, scouting was an essential skill. It was also an ability that Ryan was quite good at, so he could use spells to pierce through the gray fog and use the improved sorcerer's eye to monitor more than half of the Tahala Desert. Those who wore long robes with bloody claws embroidered on the cuffs were undoubtedly the followers, fanatics, and apostles of the black blood beasts. They were also the group that the Demolic could see the most. The second most common were the blue dragons. There were a few old species with a body length of more than 20 meters, but there were more young and adult species. If these were all true dragons, of course, they would be a terrifying force, but now, Ryan sneered in his heart. These low-intelligence beasts would rather join the camp of the big cat than live under the more blood-related emperor, the Black Dragon. Lastly, there were a large number of bandits and ferocious beasts without any organization. The Demolic didn't care about these guys. It was not difficult for the Blackwing clan to deal with these guys. Just the cavalry troops, the orcs, and the gray horses were enough to crush them back and forth. He subconsciously thought that the Black Emperor would personally deal with the apostles of Mailer. The key to this war was the Black Blood followers and the Blue Dragons. Of course, there were also the core forces of Mailer. They were indeed very difficult to deal with. The top forces of Blackwing's nest. Although Nero, Husky, and Hog had been baptized by the dragon bloodline and were undoubtedly powerful, their descendants, whether it was the Hound Demon clan or the Flying Dragon clan, were no match for the Black Blood followers and the Blue Dragons in a one-on-one fight. What would His Majesty do? What should we do? Hearing Luna's naive question, Caesar bared his teeth and said to the little fellow with a smile, "War is not a duel. Why would the Blackwing clan want to fight one-on-one with the Hunter God's minions? The army of the Blackwing's nest has the advantage in numbers. If one wyvern is not a match for the blue draconic beast, what about 5? What about 10? From a moment the Black Dragon entered the dark zone and grasped the power in his hands. He had been developing cautiously for almost 15 years. 15 years of accumulation was all for this moment. A beast god who wasn't welcomed by Iradia. If he didn't personally descend and instead wanted to compete with Caesar in terms of military strength and resources, then sorry, the Black Dragon Lord would only be considered average. Caesar Tangerine was no longer the little black dragon who only had the Stone Crow clan in his hands. Now that he had many cards in his hands, he didn't have to be as careful as before. When facing the foolish Mailer, he could just directly push forward. He would just fight like that. The Black Dragon couldn't guarantee that the countries in the north didn't have Mailer spies, but this wouldn't affect the war. The so-called Hunter God would either fight or get lost. 3 days later, according to the sky, there would be a rainstorm at night. On the border of Khaki, the descendants of the Blackwing clan were densely packed. Under the control of their respective leaders, they all put a pill into their mouths and held it between their teeth. That was the violent medicine that the wild boars were responsible for researching and creating in the secret base of the Blackwing's nest located in the Dark Zone. Many years ago, the Angramo had specially found a plantation for this purpose. Although the violent medicine had never been revealed, it had never stopped being produced. The huge stock was enough to supply every descendant of the Blackwing's nest. A mountain-like black figure gradually appeared in the field of vision. The huge black dragon Lord slowly climbed up the city wall. This terrifying, 25-meter-long legendary dragon raised its head and looked down at its own army. At the bottom, an army of almost 50,000 beasts was silent. After a while, Caesar tilted his head slightly and ordered, "Barrett, raise the flag of the Blackwing Empire." "Yes, your majesty." Beside the black dragon, the minstrel, who was as small as a mosquito and trembling in fear, replied, "It would be more appropriate to call him the Minister of Propaganda now." Barrett left the evil dragon emperor's side as if he was fleeing for his life and ran towards the black shirt troops below. "His Majesty's order, raise the flag." Caesar turned his head and saw the flagpoles being raised. The black flag unfolded in the wind, and the dark golden pattern appeared dignified and solemn. It was his miniature abstract painting, hand-drawn by Luna. The rock-solid city wall was burning fiercely under the black dragon's feet, indicating that all enemies would meet their end. "This war will be the beginning of the Blackwing Empire," he said to himself. Originally, in Caesar's plan, the integration of the northern countries was a long-term project. However, many things were reflected when the war was imminent. The support of the people gave him confidence, and the perfunctory refusal of the rulers gave him a lot of excuses. When this war was over, Caesar would be able to settle accounts with the old nobles and hang them alive. Then, he would forcefully establish the Blackwing Empire. It would not be a big problem. The main battle force of the Blackwing clan had already arrived at the border of Khaki 3 days ago. Now, after 3 days of rest, the monsters were full and ready to go. During this time, Caesar glanced at the northern army in the corner. Although the Blackwing nobles under the Black Emperor were eager to prepare for war and were enthusiastic, they were after all new nobles who had just received their fiefdoms. They had no foundation to speak of. They could only provide some temporary militia. The old nobles were half-hearted. They were not willing to give up their remaining army, so they forced some old, weak, and sick people to come up. They were sparse and not a big deal. Caesar only gave them a cursory glance and no longer paid any attention to them. Anyway, he did not have any expectations for these guys. He just wanted the northern army to put on a show to show their presence and give some comfort to the people. The Blackwing clan was the main force to deal with the hunting god. After letting the commander of the northern army do as he saw fit, Caesar did not say anything. He quietly waited for the night to come. The sun gradually turned from a hot golden color to a murky yellow. Finally, it disappeared into the vast sea in the west. The entire northern land was dominated by the night. Layers of dark clouds quickly pressed down. Occasionally, there would be a bright flash of lightning. However, an even bigger dark cloud was rapidly rising. Manticores and flying dragons covered the sky. Almost all the people who were relocated to Khaki walked out of their houses and looked up at this familiar scene. The army surged into Khaki territory and left the border. The last time they saw this scene, they were all gnashing their teeth. They hoped that the Blackwing clan would be defeated and that the Black Dragon's head would be cut off and nailed to a bronze pillar. However, this time, they actually hoped that the Blackwing clan would win. Chapter 265. The monster clans that emerged from the border of Khaki were like a black tide. They rushed into the Tahala Desert and rushed to the place where the followers of the god of hunting were stationed. Dark clouds covered the dome, and it began to rain in the desert, which was rare. War was not child's play. Although Mailer's army was not much better than a mob, it did not mean that they were brainless and capable. They would definitely take necessary precautions. Therefore, in the Tahala Desert, the Black Blood Gods clans had set up a lot of surveillance. It was the same along the border of Khaki. Even if they moved under the cover of the night, the Blackwing clan could not be completely hidden. Therefore, as soon as they left the city, the Black Blood Gods clans were already aware and vigilant. However, this had no effect on the war. Caesar had also expected this. Taking the initiative to attack and fighting head-on, the Blackwing clan, as the attacking party, would definitely charge forward. However, they would not charge forward with all their troops. When the god of hunting was on guard, the first batch of clans would definitely die. Casualties were secondary. In the face of such an outcome, No matter how fierce and strong the Blackwing clan was, they would still be reluctant and push each other. Therefore, the Blackwing clan was not the only one participating in this war. The undead army commanded by Angramo would also enter the Tahala Desert. Although the skeletal dragon and the higher-ups of the undead army would not participate in the war, they would command tens of thousands of unintelligent and strengthened skeletons to attack the forces of the god of hunting from another side. This would attract Mailer's attention and provide cover for the Blackwing clan's attack. Of course, the Blackwing clan's charge was also divided into batches. Under Caesar's arrangement, the clans formed their own groups, which were led by their own leaders. They marked 3 strongholds on the way that were safe to rely on and charged alternately. After that, they would hold their positions and wait. At the same time, the wyverns, manticores, and the thorn beasts that joined later would arrive at the battlefield first. They would suppress the enemy's firepower with long-range means and attract the enemy spellcasters to cast spells on their defensive means. This would cover the heavily armed orcs and demon hounds. This was the strategy that Caesar had set at the beginning. On the bloody ground, the liches waved their white-boned scepters, triggered the shadow elements, and awakened skeleton soldiers one after another from the newly built cemetery. Then, under the control of the skeletal dragon, the skeleton soldiers joined the other unintelligent skeletons in the attack on the god of Hunt's colony, continuing to exert pressure on them. On the other side, the heavy hammer beastmen clad in heavy armor and wielding machetes slapped their mounts. They converged with the roaring demonkin and began charging. The manticore and thorn beasts were already in position. At the same time, many figures holding rod-like objects could be seen among the black blood believers in the distance. However, before the two sides had even come into contact with each other, a strange change had already occurred. All the creatures in the Tahala Desert, including the Blackwing clan, felt as if their souls were being crushed by a rolling torrent. The extreme pressure was so strong that it felt as if it was going to squeeze them into a ball. Fear, anxiety, and nervousness mixed together, causing all the creatures to feel suffocated on the spiritual level. This was the might of a legendary true dragon. Speaking of which, the people in the north might not believe that the first person to make a move in this war that was known as resisting the god of Hunt was their emperor, Caesar Tangerine. The dark clouds parted, and a huge, irregular shadow swept across the desert like a hurricane. The monsters and believers below all raised their heads, and the first thing they saw was a pitch-black armor and sharp barbs that extended all the way to the grotesque tail. There were huge black wings with intertwined, thick joints, and the tail was spurting out bright crimson flames. Air was spurting out from the bottom of the wings, and there was a loud rumbling sound. Without any expectation or hesitation, the Black Dragon Lord did not come late like in the epic stories. Instead, he appeared at the first moment and appeared in front of the enemy in an invincible manner. The huge black dragon roared across the sky, staring at the densely packed black blood believers, bandits, and the roaring blue dragon below. His crimson vertical eyes were cold. He came, bringing with him flames and thunder. Caesar just lowered his head and exhaled. The flames that were equivalent to the legendary red dragon gushed out from the black dragon's mouth. In the roaring storm, the flames burned through the defensive barriers built by the spellcasters and plowed through the black blood god's position again and again in a destructive manner. The trenches of war were like nothing in front of him. The magic-heavy crossbows all exploded and collapsed, and terrible howls came from below. At the other end of the endless worlds away from Iradia, in the god's kingdom, the god of Hunt, Mailer, a big black cat with a body length of more than 50 meters, arched his back and bared his teeth. The scene of the north was reflected in his eyes. The scene of the legendary black dragon spitting out dragon's breath without restraint was deeply reflected in his eyes. Caesar Orderonso Tangerine. He had already obtained the dragon's true name. Mailer chuckled and said, but immediately, the chaotic beast's expression became ferocious. It seems that I have underestimated you. How dare you take the initiative to attack my believers? Ignorant and fearless reptile, you will soon taste the mighty power of a god. Under the high throne of the Black Blood God, the divine believers who had been gathered into the god's kingdom were already in a mess. Using the powerful energy of the entire god's kingdom, these divine believers could also see the scene of Iradia and even control some of the strong believers with strong beliefs. Master, a divine believer crawled at the feet of the Black Blood Beast. What should we do now? This bastard dares to take the initiative to come out and die. Can't I satisfy him? The god of Hunt, Malor, curled his lips in disdain, the whiskers around his mouth trembling like a cat's. Have all the troops in Tahala changed their target? Attack this black dragon. Kill him or exhaust his strength. Wait for me to do it myself. The reason why Caesar had appeared at the beginning of the battle was mainly to motivate his followers and provide the Blackwing clan with a spiritual support. Secondly, it would minimize the losses on his side and attack the enemy. Caesar's single target damage output was no less than that of an entire army. At the same time, because he had the magic resistance of the gold rank, low-end weakening spells were nothing to him. Under such circumstances, the sooner the Black Dragon Lord appeared, the more he could influence the balance of the war. There was no doubt about this. However, all of Caesar's considerations were based on the level of the war between the Blackwing Empire and the God of Hunt. What he did not expect was that Malor's intelligence could not be measured by common sense. Indeed, at the beginning, the God of Hunt wanted to rule the northern countries, but after the disobedience and humiliation of the Black Dragon, Malor had completely changed his mind. At this time, the God of Hunt no longer cared about consumption, victory, or defeat, nor did he think about ruling the northern countries. He only wanted the Black Dragon to die, even if it meant the destruction of all of Iradia's forces. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.